October 18th, 2016. We do expect our three other members, but I'll start with present at the moment is Mrs. Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Llewellyn. And we have four students with us at the moment. Ms. Ashley Agrello and Ms. Brittany Schuster, welcome. And then from Ludlow, Catherine Bajardi and Sean Oppenheimer. So we welcome you as well. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we get back to our regular routine of having students report to us at the beginning of the meeting. For those who are from last year, you know that I always invite you to stay for the whole meeting or to take off if that's what is in your best interest. And I also invite for the new students, so that you heard that, but that while you have a pattern of telling us what's happening at the school, you are always welcome to comment on agenda items as you see them on our agenda that you might have a viewpoint on and that you'd like to not necessarily speak for the entire student body, but to speak on behalf of students that you think would share your opinion. And I'll allow you to speak to that item during the student report item rather than wait till it comes up on the agenda in respect for your class schedule and homework schedule and getting ready for tests the next day. So, having said that, welcome again. So why don't we hear from Fairfield Ward High School first.
Hi, I'm Brittany Schuster. It's good to be back. Good to see everyone. Hope you had a good summer. So we started off school welcoming our freshmen like we do every year. We had the freshman orientation, show all the ninth graders around, and we had the orientation. On September 8th, we also had our open house, so all the parents got to come, and Dr. Jones actually was able to come, so she was able to meet all the parents and was able to see how our school is, and that was really nice. We have the PSATs tomorrow for sophomores and juniors, so they're all very nervous about that, but it's practice, so that's good. The seniors are either going to a job shadow, are going to visit a college, or go in for college workshops. And we also, for October, for every Friday, we have Senior Spirit Days, where we have a certain theme that the seniors get to dress up as. So we had Decades Day, Career Day. This week we have our Spirit Day, which Ashley will touch upon right now.
Well, kind of like what Brittany was saying, we do have Spirit Days every Friday for the month of October. So this week is the last Spirit Day where we are going to represent our ward pride by wearing red, white, and black. And this is in lieu of the pep rally during school and the game that's going to be following that later that day. And homecoming that's going to be on Saturday. So fun. In September, we had our summer symposium and summer reading. I'm sure most of you are more familiar with the summer reading, but this year we kind of changed the format a bit. So instead of just having a summer reading, we offered students to do extensive research on different topics that they'd like to talk about. And in place of doing the reading, they would do that. And I would say that that was very successful. We had a lot of student participants, and they got really into the topics that they were talking about. Oh boy, here we go. Also, in September coming into October, there was Red Ribbon Week, where we had speakers coming in to talk about different topics. I went with my AP Psychology class to go listen to something about eating disorders, and I think it was pretty enlightening to see or to hear about different subjects like that. Lastly, of course, it's college application season. And so all us seniors are working really hard, but everyone's being very supportive. We have all the guidance counselors to thank for that, of course.
Thank you. Any questions for our students from Ward High School? Any questions? No? So let's hear about Fairfield Ludlow High School.
Hi, my name is Catherine Bajati. I'm a senior at Fairfield Ludlow High School. So tomorrow, as Ward has beautifully touched upon, the PSATs, our freshmen at Ludlow will also be doing like a little program, a little activity, and doing the Anti-Defamation League program. So they'll be doing that throughout the day. And as Ward said, the seniors will be going on college visits, shadowing their parents, doing some projects and everything to help them prepare for the college application. And the Guidance Counseling Center has helped us a lot with the college application process, and we're very thankful for that. And an upcoming event is High School 101 presentation for parents, which gives us incoming parents of freshman students the ability to understand what a GPA is, what a transcript is, the whole high school experience as a whole. Since like the block scheduling has changed, it'll just give them insight on how the whole high school process works, as it is different than from the middle school perspective. So, yeah.
One thing I did want to mention is that Mr. Hatz has had to send out an email to the parents for 2 reasons. You have the email right here. First, there were a few students who contracted a infection called MRSA. It spreads through open wounds. One thing that was made clear in the email is that every effort was being made to make sure that it wasn't being spread, and that an outbreak, like a major outbreak among athletes, is highly unlikely. And also, he wanted to inform the parents that there is a new form of e-cigarettes. It's called Juuls, spelled J-U-U-L, and it looks exactly like a USB flash drive, like something that you would use to store files on. And he was able to tell parents how it looked to make sure that if they see something like that, they were able to identify it and take interventions if needed. And that's all he sent in the email. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Questions from the board for our Ludlow students? Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just a question to any of the 4 of you, since you're all seniors. I was wondering if any of you had gone to that PTA-sponsored event. I believe it was held at Ludlow with some college admissions counselors that came. I know there was someone, I think, from Williams, Amherst, a few other school, Tufts. I didn't know if that was something any of you had been able to attend and react to.
Do you mean the college visits in the College and Career Center?
No, it was a nighttime activity for both students and parents. I wasn't sure if it was something you had. Sorry to spring the question on you. I should have prepared you ahead of time, but that's not something any of you went to or heard students talking about?
No, that's not something that I was even informed of. We do have college visits. We have college representatives come to visit our school, and we have a 30-minute info session, talk about applications and what it's like to live on campus or off campus of that particular school. I'm not really familiar with that whole meeting at night with the parents and the college representatives, but I'm sure a lot of students went, and I'm sure it was a great event.
We did have a kind of meeting with all the seniors and stuff, with all the guidance counselors, and I believe Mr. Ebling was there too. We kind of went over the general college admissions thing and how we were going to prepare for it with our guidance counselors, and they did mention the PTA-sponsored thing at Ludlow, but I wasn't available that night.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our students from Ludlow? Okay, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at each meeting as your schedule permits. Public comment. This is the period where members of the public can comment on agenda items. that are on the Board of Education's agenda tonight. I'll call specific reference to the racial imbalance plan and the budget ideas for Board of Ed members. And of course, we do have some voting items that you can comment at the time of the vote as well. Any member of the public wish to come forward and speak on any item that is on the agenda? Okay, thank you very much. Our item number 5, which is enclosure number 1 in the packet, and it's in the back of the room, is discussion of the racial imbalance plan. Dr. Tracy and Mr. Cummings. So Mr. Cummings may want to come up to the table. And do you want to start us off?
I do indeed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cummings, for helping me along the way over the last few weeks as we've worked to put this plan together. As you may know, Connecticut General Statutes Section 10-226 requires that school districts see to it that the minority makeup of any particular school not deviate from the district-wide average by more than 25%. And as the data in the plan indicates, for all but one of the past 6 years, Fairfield has been outside of that range with respect to the McKinley School. Just a little bit of history. McKinley was initially identified as imbalanced in 2007, and the district was required to submit a plan, which was submitted to the State Board of Education, dated August 15, 2007. 3 years later, in 2010, an amendment to that plan was presented. And then last year, the State Board of Education gave notice of continued imbalance with respect to that school and directed the board to submit further amendments to address the problem. In 2015-2016, the Board of Education engaged the firm of Malone and McBroom to conduct a fairly exhaustive study of redistricting as an option to deal with the racial imbalance issue. And several of you may have seen the report that was issued to the board in February of 2016. A key conclusion in that document was that a comprehensive solution to the racial imbalance problem would not likely be practical until after the Holland Hill and Mill Hill construction projects are completed. The chairman and the superintendent presented this information to the state board in May of this year. And the state board accepted that information and requested that the board return again this fall with further amendments to address the continued imbalance. So that's where we stand as of now. Initially, the presentation to the state board was scheduled for December 7. When I explained to the attorney up there that our new superintendent would only be starting here December 5th, they kindly granted a reprieve until January 4, 2017. They still expect the plan to be submitted on November 18. Board action on the plan is scheduled for November 15, so we should be able to meet that deadline. Our purpose tonight is to discuss the plan, to hear board members' comments and reactions, probably questions for further study or information that you may want from me or the staff prior to the 15th. But I'd like to just characterize the plan in general for folks who may not have had a chance to look at it, and then we'll be open for discussion and questions from the board. First of all, the two corrections that I need to make, and they will be corrected the next time you see this document. One is that on page 2, in the chart that presents the history of racial imbalance, the note about K-5 other than McKinley is incorrect and should not be there. So next time you see this, I'll be removing the little asterisk at the top of the middle column and removing the note. Those figures, the figures on the page are correct, but they include all 11 of the district's elementary schools. And second, in refiguring our assumptions about the impact that a pre-K program expansion would have on the proportion of minority students at McKinley, it now appears that that would be more like 3%, not the original 6% that I had calculated. So again, the next time you see this, as we continue, that is, I'll mention it when we get to it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Page 6, is it? Right. Bottom, 2 lines up from the bottom on page 6. Having said that, I regard the proposal that is in front of you tonight as a modest, cost-effective interim response to the continuing concerns about racial imbalance. If adopted by the board, I believe it would represent a good faith effort to respond to the fact that while the percentage of minority youngsters in the district overall is rising slowly, on average about 0.6% per year, it is actually rising somewhat faster at McKinley, about 0.9% per year. This plan does not call for redistricting or realignment, but it does not foreclose options of that sort in the future. I believe it's an appropriate strategy at this particular point, really for a couple of reasons. One, you're in a position of interim school construction work that's proceeding and will be coming to fruition in the next few years. And then, of course, you're in an interim position with respect to district leadership. And so for both of those reasons, I thought the approach that emerged here was appropriate for the time being. The plan calls for an expansion in our existing pre-K program, adding 36 students to the current total over the next couple of years. Over that 2-year period, the plan calls for the phasing out of the program at Dwight School, which enrolls a relatively small number of students, and the addition of a program at the Stratfield School in 17-18. And then, if demand warrants and space is available, we anticipate a third program, either at Burr or at Stratfield, being added. And that brings us the additional pre-K students that we're hoping for. As you may know, students who opt to participate in the pre-K program have the opportunity to stay at that school, and in the case of McKinley youngsters, to bring brothers and sisters in with them once they get to kindergarten. Our plan assumes that by moving the program closer to McKinley and by intensifying our outreach and recruitment efforts, we can grow the program in this manner. We've noted in looking at recent history that for every McKinley minority child that involves themselves in the pre-K program, roughly 3.4 McKinley minority children are enrolled in K-5 outside of McKinley the following year. That's on a 3-year average. And so this plan assumes that if we expand the pre-K program, and if each McKinley participant brings not 3.4 but 2 students with them, brothers and sisters, then the minority population at McKinley would be reduced somewhat, 2.5% to as much as 3.9%. And I don't want to get caught up in all the arithmetic because, as you will appreciate, the numbers are very small, and the slightest change in an assumption or a decision about families to engage in the pre-K program and to stay in the school that the pre-K is in can really change these numbers. But roughly, I'm estimating roughly that somewhere between 3 and 4 points of change could happen as a result. The second strategy that's outlined in the plan is the expansion of the open choice program, under which youngsters attend the Fairfield Public Schools from the city of Bridgeport. Currently, we have 72 students in the district who are here through open choice. 51 of those youngsters are in the K-5 program. These youngsters are admitted on a space available basis with an emphasis on the early elementary grades so that the youngsters have a chance to stay with us if they choose to all the way through their high school experience. There are 17 school districts in DRGs A and B that participate in the open choice program, and there's a handout at your place that indicates who those districts are and what percentage of their enrollment is accounted for by open choice students. Just a couple of words about cost. If the 2 amendments that I've just described were implemented, we estimate that the new expenses related to pre-K expansion would be about $145,000 in year 1, offset by about $96,000 of new revenue. Both tuition for the pre-K program and the open choice program brings with it $3,000 per student. Some of these costs are one-time only, to put up a playground or to buy technology, and those costs would drop away after the first year. In year 2, I'm estimating new expenses to bring the third pre-K program online at about $121,000 against revenue of about $80,000. So there is an additional cost, but I think given the alternatives, it is a cost-effective way to deal with the problem. In summary, in terms of impact, were we to implement the pre-K program, we're estimating about a 3-point reduction in the minority proportion at McKinley, and we're anticipating about a 0.5% increase in the minority percentage throughout the district. The current gap, if you will, the extent to which the district is beyond the 25% limit is 2.2%. So if we can get about 3% out of pre-K and 0.5% out of open choice, that should bring us back into compliance. Having said that, if the trend continues with McKinley's minority proportion growing at a somewhat faster rate than the district's, it may be necessary to take further steps a year or two down the road. And therefore, I've included in the plan the notion of considering a magnet school program of some sort. No commitment at this point as to what it would be or even if it would be, but simply to look at it as a further step that could be taken if the steps that I've outlined tonight are insufficient as the years go by. A modest magnet program enrolling perhaps 50 students, for which there would be room, I believe, at McKinley School without additional classroom space, would reduce the proportion of minority youngsters at the school somewhere between 2 and 3 percentage points. This evening, as I said, our purpose is to get the board's initial reaction to all of this, additional questions that you want us to research in the intervening weeks, and to set the stage for your action on November 15th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So that the board understands the time frame, the State Board of Education is very diligent about getting information so they can review it and then put it in a packet well in advance of the proposed January date. So they, we only really look at putting our packets together 5 days before the board meeting. They have a much longer lead time, and so that's why the date was mentioned. Questions from the board on Mr. Patton, followed by Mrs. Maxon Pinelli, right?
Could I just one clarification? That financial information you had mentioned wasn't in this. I was wondering if you could repeat that.
Sure, and I can...
Or include it in the new draft?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
But if you could repeat it, that'd be great.
Oh, I'm happy to... Okay.
Can I suggest that it's not part of the draft? It would be an information sheet for the board, because the State Board of Education does not require that level of information, and generally you like to answer the question they ask, not beyond. So we can send it to the board.
Would you like me to
But you still want to
briefly
get the
summarize?
sense of revenue and expense, yes.
Sure. In the first year, there would be annual costs of about $105,000. I'm using round numbers here. And that includes staff salary and transportation. There'd be an additional one-time cost for playground technology and furniture at the new Stratfield program. $40,000.
It's year one.
Year one.
Yeah.
So putting those two numbers together, we're estimating about $145,000 in expenses in year one, and revenue of about $96,000. And the $96,000 is made up of tuition at the pre-K program, and we've made some assumptions about the percentage of youngsters who would be full and half and free. And then we're also proposing, as you've seen, an increase in the tuition for the pre-K program, which hasn't been changed for quite a while, up to $42.50, with the waivers for low-income families. So there would be some modest revenue from existing families just because of the increase. So that accounts for the $96,000 in revenue. The difference between the two, the net cost, if you will, is about $49,000 in year one.
And is that, the 96 in tuition, is that solely pre-K?
No, excuse me. I meant to say the pre-K piece is about 54, and then there would be 42,000 for the open choice students. We'd be adding 14 additional students in year one at $3,000 apiece. So 42 and 54 gives you about 96. And so that revenue would be applied against the additional cost. The picture is similar in the second year. The one-time costs are a little bit less because we don't have to do another playground at Stratfield or at Burr for another school. But there'd be about, in the second year, there'd be about a $41,000 net cost minus revenue.
And the breakdown between pre-K and?
The pre-K revenue in year 2 is about $38,000.
42 again.
And the open choice tuition, another 42, because we'd be taking a second group of 14 youngsters in.
Got it. Thank you.
And we'll put this in as an attachment, but as the chairman said, at least I don't anticipate making it, part of the plan, because I'm sure these numbers will move around as we work our way through.
That was your question, correct? So thank you for allowing Jennifer to go first.
Follow on those
Mr.
numbers.
Patton, followed by...
stealing essentially what was my question. I was going to, whoa, it's loud tonight. I was going to request that we could get maybe a one-page summary of the financials broken down as you just described in an information packet, so that would be really helpful. Thanks. So.
Mrs. McCormick.
On the cost piece for years 1 and 2, what are you assuming as the per student cost for the open choice?
Well, our pattern in the past for open choice is to place youngsters in early elementary grades where their addition will not trigger us into another section. We may have costs up to $3,000 for special ed purposes if a youngster is found to be in need of special services. But we were able to check with the folks at CES who manage the program, and they wrote back saying that special ed costs beyond the $3,000 that we receive would go back to the sending district. So we're not, beyond that, we're not assuming any costs here because our plan is to put youngsters in empty seats that in grades where we're not close to needing another section.
So we're assuming 0 cost to take on how many students in total again?
14 in each of 2 years, 28 altogether.
So there'll be 0 cost to take 28 students is what we're assuming.
That is the assumption. They will figure into the overall, per pupil cost in the district, but their presence we're anticipating, other than special ed, should not involve the addition of significant other costs. There may be some costs, another textbook, another box of crayons, another seat on the bus, so to speak, but we're not assuming any other significant costs beyond special ed, and that's capped at $3,000.
And just as a follow-on on that, right, so if we were to assume the per pupil cost right now on average for the district is what, 15 or 16,000?
15 and change. Yeah.
15 and change. So in aggregate, you would look at that in general, like if it was any other student, aside from open choice, we would look at that as a average cost of about 15,000 times the 28, correct? And then we would subtract the 3,000 for whatever we're getting reimbursed from the state. Is that correct? And that would include transportation, because the transportation is paid for by the sending district, correct?
I'd want to check with Mr. Cummings on that. Do you know who pays the transportation costs for the Bridgeport youngsters?
Good evening, Mike Cummings, Director of Elementary Ed. The transportation costs are borne by the state as part of the Open Choice Grant Program, and, and CES coordinates that service.
And how about the food? Like if there's a free lunch or that sort of thing?
That would be borne. If they qualify for any free or reduced lunch services, that price is borne by the federal government as part of the Title I grant.
So it's
not as part of, excuse me, as part of the free lunch program.
Okay. And then also just the final thing. So again, when we talked about special ed services or any other kind of special services, that would again be fully covered by the state, or who covers that?
The message, maybe Mr. Cummings, you could comment on that, but that's the message we got back from CES, I believe.
In correspondence with CES, and based on my past experience in another district, when a student is in the open choice program and their services extend past what I would call baseline special ed services, say they're going beyond a resource room, say they need a paraprofessional for support, then that service is coordinated through our special ed department as well as the sending schools special ed department, and those services are paid for by the sending district.
Okay, so the only cost that we would bear would be the providing day-to-day education, so the teacher's time, the materials, technology, that sort of a thing that we would offer the students.
Much of the cost is, in a sense, an economy of scale. You know, the one more seat in the classroom. When you think about cost for a student like this, as Dr. Tracy said, it would be the cost of an additional textbook, which, quite honestly, would be used by, if not used by this year by an open choice student, would be used in another year by somebody else. If the district were to sponsor any field trips or any of those types of costs, the student, that would be added in, but it's a relatively low cost per student.
I know, I am fully cognizant of the concept of the incremental marginal student concept, but that really applies to every student,
Right,
any student.
right.
So to just say that it only applies to these students wouldn't necessarily be fair.
That's not what I said.
Okay.
It's the way you just do the per pupil cost. It can be overstating the cost for each student.
Correct, but I think 0 would be understating it.
Yeah, no one gets by for free.
Exactly, thank you.
Ms. Pitko.
I just wanted to clarify. So for the preschools and the proposed preschools, will we have some kind of feeder pattern? In other words, if they are a preschool student in the McKinley community, would that mean that they would automatically go to Stratfield? I'm just trying to clarify.
If a youngster is in the preschool program, either at Burr or Dwight right now, or at Stratfield, they have the option, once they become a kindergartner, to stay there and to invite their brothers and sisters to join them. The three schools that we're looking at, Stratfield and Burr, together with McKinley, are all in the same feeder pattern, I believe. They all go to Tomlinson Middle School and then up to high school.
That's correct.
But are you asking, if you want to apply, is it open choice that the parent chooses whether to apply to Burr and/or Dwight? Is that
Yeah, I'm trying to clarify that when a parent goes to apply, that they would automatically go to the preschool at
So,
Stratfield.
Since we have two programs at the moment, and a parent is assigned to one of the two or chooses one of the two?
Under the current system, there is a feeder pattern, because with Burr and Dwight, what we've done is establish that certain elementary schools feed Burr, certain elementary schools feed Dwight, and just parenthetically, anyone can go to the ECC program at Ward. What we would have to reestablish now, since they are essentially moved to the same feeder pattern, is, are we going to replicate that process? In other words, certain schools would feed Stratfield, certain schools would feed Burr, or would it become a matter of kind of parent choice at this point, since the feeder pattern essentially will remain the same? But that's not a conversation we've had yet, because we're waiting for board action on the plan before we go through that level of step.
You actually brought up my next question, which was the ECC, which is a preschool where students get services, but there's also other students that attend in a different ratio. So my question, the ECC is kind of growing out of its space. Are we going to provide services at Stratfield, per se?
For special education students?
Yes.
That would be a conversation we'd have to have with Ms. Leonardi and Ms. Bruno down the road. I had a conversation with Ms. Bruno. As you say, they are growing out of space, and it's something we have to consider down the road, but it isn't part of this plan at this point.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Ms. Carnell?
Thank you. Just clarification, through the chair to Dr. Tracy, I want to make sure I got your numbers correct. If I'm following you, presently McKinley has 449, I believe.
That's correct.
And I know some of this needs to be updated, so I want to make sure I scribbled as quickly as you spoke. But then you said, for example, if we go to a magnet school, there could be an additional 50 for McKinley. Was I following you correctly?
That's correct. The school's capacity is 504.
That's why I was asking. So we're really cutting it close if we bring in 50. Dad, please, because I'm just following the numbers I have in front.
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind, because if a magnet does occur, it will be somewhere down the road. So I think what you'd need to do would be to look at the enrollment projections moving forward. And my recollection is that McKinley's goes down. So
You have it somewhere in your bag.
so they won't have it. So it will be lower than 449. So it wouldn't be completely pushing the outside of the envelope. Then theoretically, I think it was like 420, 415.
Did it drop that much?
Well, it's projected to.
Right,
I mean,
right.
obviously
We don't
these
know.
are all
I mean,
right. But we do get updated projections as well. So I think, I mean, again, the magnet's something that's not an immediate
Right.
issue. So I think if it was, that 50 probably wouldn't be a great idea. But looking forward, because the numbers are projected to go down, that could be a possibility and still not have McKinley at full capacity.
Is there any sort of time frame of thought in regards to this magnet school?
Not really. Dr. Jones and I were able to talk about this, and what I'm trying to do is frankly leave your and her options open to see what happens with enrollment projections. How
Thanks a
effective-
lot.
Pardon me?
I said thanks a lot.
How effective the pre-K and open choice changes are, and so that then, if need be, and if space is available, you could consider another option. But I did think, in light of the fact that, as I mentioned before, that McKinley's minority proportion is growing slightly faster than the district's, that it would be good to at least let the state board know that we're thinking beyond the immediate two steps.
Thank you. And one last question, again, just to clarify. Through the chair to Mr. Cummings, I think you said, nothing's for free, sort of. There is no such thing as a free meal. But you said the course really should be minimal. If I follow you, you said there is the cost of the teacher's time, correct?
Well,
That's what I wrote down, and I just wanted to see if I heard
as
it
part of, if you think about the cost of one of our elementary teachers' times, there's the planning for the whole class and there's planning for individuals. Yeah. So
Right.
that is a piece of the work.
Well, and forgive me, you would know better than I. I'm not, trained at this. But I would imagine that when you refer to teachers' time, it's not just a training. But if you have X amount of kids in a classroom and X amount are raising their hand because they need help, wouldn't that also affect the teacher's time? Not just the planning, but the day-to-day as the teachers in the classroom trying to teach X amount of students?
I think the best way to put this would be that at a certain point with elementary classroom, or actually in any classroom, the number of students in the room hits a point where, if you look at our class sizes at the elementary, which average around 20 change, the difference of one or two students in a classroom at that point is really minimal on the teacher's time. I would say, as a comparison, for example, if two of those students are absent, the teacher doesn't go home any less tired. If that makes sense. I mean, there's a, it depends on the student, though, I should say. But no, I think that time is really minimal. I mean, I think it's something that we're always in pursuit of, but I think that time is minimal.
Well, I guess your focus, you keep referring to the teachers, and I'm taking the focus to the students. If you have more students, maybe the teacher doesn't go home more tired, but the students then, if you break it down proportionally, are getting less time from the teacher.
I don't think that that's true. I think that when, because I don't believe it's a strict ratio. On any given day, in any given instructional period, there are students who are going to require more support, and whether they're struggling to learn or exceeding their learning expectations. But that varies day to day, and almost period to period.
Right. So again, I guess I keep saying, if you isn't that why we limit the amount of kids per classroom? Because we want the students to learn always as best they can. So by putting more students in a classroom, whether they're from anywhere, if we just change the student size of a classroom, won't that be, affecting the student directly, because there'll be less time for the teacher to give per student? And
Well-
isn't that the reason, I guess, that we went to less students per classroom, or try to teach, keep the student size down if possible?
It is, and that's why the board has, the class sizes of the 23 in general at the 10 schools, and at K2 and 25 and 3, 4, 5, and 2 less at each level at McKinley. But I think this would be, if we were having a conversation about a number greater than 25 and 3, 4, 5, then we would be talking, I think, about a greater impact. When we're talking about a number under 25, and in fact, most I should say, some of those classes might have 18, some of them might have close to 25. That extra student or two is not going to make that much of a difference for their learning or the impact of the others. I think that there's a if you look at the relational studies around class size, there is a number that people identify, and the board has identified it in their policy as greater than 25 as having an impact. Under that, it's our expectation that teachers are going to be able to meet the needs of every student. At some point, open choice students or not, the identification of lower class sizes, that's a never-ending quest that a board could pursue that could result in larger schools and a very costly staffing formulation.
Could I just comment on your
Sure, I
inquiry,
had
line of
one
inquiry?
more. Please, go ahead.
We have approximately 160, 170 sections of elementary school classrooms.
220 right now.
220. So we're talking about 28 additional students who would be spread through those 220 sections. So let's assume that we won't get too many that opt in 5th grade. And so let's assume that it's less than that. We're really talking about a fairly small per student impact on an individual section at an individual school, because 28 students spread over 10 schools or 200 and some odd sections is not that big of an impact.
And could I just add one thing to that, Mr. Dwyer? The other thing I would add is, and I only have done this once in Fairfield, but I've done this before. When you look for placements, for example, we'll take our enrollment projection, and when we look at placements, which we do in February, that's when we have to identify slots for open choice students. We're looking for places that might, let's take a kindergarten, for example, might right now show 51 students in 3 sections, so an average size of 17. We're not going to, we'll identify that potentially as a place to put the open choice students. We're not looking at a 1st grade or a kindergarten section that has 63 students in 3 sections, and that's 21. So we're looking for a place where there is going to have the minimal impact on the class size. We don't want to go too high, because if a few students move in, suddenly we're in the area of having to add a teacher, and that's something that I know we worked to avoid last year, but I know the district has worked to avoid for every year since they've been involved with open choice.
You have a final
I just had
question.
a
I don't want to
final, I know.
interrupt your questions.
Which I think, Ms. Cummings, to your point, that did happen, if I remember, at Mill Hill. I remember Dr. Title saying that I think 2 kids entered the district at the last moment, and they had to bring in another teacher. Now, I could have the stats wrong, but I know it was Mill Hill. And that's what happened. I guess they registered during the summer. So that's my point. And then if I'm following you, you're saying we're going to spread it out as best as possible. But then again, we can't spread it out to every school, because we're going to go to the schools where it's potentially can affect them the least of attendance. So, Chairman Dwyer, I'm not sure that I followed your stats, because Mr. Cummings saying they're going to keep it not to every school. If it could affect in a negative way, we'd have to keep it to certain schools. So it's not that it affects 220 sections, it could affect many more. it's going to be a bigger impact than spread over 220 sections,
Right.
if I'm following what you're saying.
Well,
as
yes, and
well as-
if we're only talking K2, or excuse me, K1 at the same time, you're talking roughly 60 sections minus, say, I'll take off the top of my head, 7 or 8 for McKinley and Holland Hill, where we tried to have been too crowded, quite honestly. The other thing, though, to keep in mind is as I think it's clear in Dr. Tracy's plan, the number is an aspirational number. So if we get through to February and we cannot identify 14 slots, we're not going to place 14 students. I mean, this is what we're hoping for. This past year, we were able to place that many. But circumstances being what they may, if we're cutting it close, we can't do it.
So we have to give the final commitment in February.
In February.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, and then followed by Mr. Patton.
So after hearing all of this, I guess I am kind of confused as to why we are using this as a solution for racial imbalance. Because as it's been pointed out, this is supposed to be kind of a minimal impact, and even in its aggregate, it is only 0.5%, and that number is static. And we pointed out the fact that the expected disparity for the racial imbalance is expected to grow disproportionately. So this little incremental thing that we implement really is going to have such a minimal impact on the problem that we're trying to resolve here that to kind of lump it in as a solution to me seems like, I guess I have to ask why we're not looking at something that is going to, if we truly have a problem and the state is not willing to accept the fact that the population at McKinley likes to be at McKinley, and that that's not okay, that we have to rebalance the population, then we need to find something that is more of a permanent solution and just implement it rather than every year spending a couple $100,000, $500,000 here or there for a non-solution and creating other incidental situations in the meantime that we now need to manage. So I'm not clear why this, like I see that the Burr Pre-K helped the situation somewhat, so doing something along those lines, but even that program was not fully enrolled. So the fact that we're expanding it and the Dwight program wasn't fully enrolled and didn't barely move the needle at all on the racial imbalance issue. And so all these are being considered in an effort to resolve the racial imbalance. So I guess I come back to, why are we focusing so much on this open choice, given how little and minimal the impact is?
Can I just comment on that? Given that the discrepancy right now is less than 2.5% between the 25% target and the 27.2% that we are sitting at, even a 0.5 point, which this would give us, makes a big difference. That takes you about 1/5 of the way that you need to go to get over the line. The other thing about open choice is that it is somewhat more predictable. We know that if we admit, as in the case this year, 72 youngsters from open choice, they are virtually all minority youngsters, and they impact that bottom line. With the pre-K program, of course, there's a lot of decisions that all kinds of families are making, and so it's more difficult to determine, if we add a seat, what will be the impact. So I take your point that because you're taking ultimately 100 kids and putting them into a large pool of thousands, the needle doesn't move very much.
Right.
But it would move about 0.5 point, and that gets you closer to the 2.2 that you need to get over.
I just have to imagine that there are more efficient solutions, because the only way I can see open choice as a viable strategy in the long run is if we continually grow open choice in a way commensurate with the growth, and couple that with a growth in the pre-K program, which we know that we really can't sustain that. So unless we're planning to continually expand our schools just to sustain the open choice so that we can match the growth in McKinley, which just doesn't seem to be an organic solution. This, again, appears to be like a Band-Aid for maybe 1 year at best. And this doesn't even solve the problem, open choice. The one that has a better choice, potential is the pre-K program, but that isn't even definite because it depends on the actions of others. So if, again, it turns out to be another Dwight situation, the impact could be nothing. And now we've spent another at least 100,000 between those two programs, and we've again not fixed our problem. And even though we say the cost is zero for bringing on another 28 students, we all know that, in fact, that's not necessarily true, though it's hard to quantify what the number is. There is a cost associated. So the total cost will be more than 100,000 at least, and we don't have a solution that's definitive.
So there's several people that want to speak. Who raised their hand first?
Well, I've not spoken. I was next.
Yeah, Mark was next. No, Mark's already spoken. So Mr. Llewellyn, then Mark, and then Mr. Patton.
Thank you. I've got several questions here, and I guess I'll just go right down the top. To the chair, please, first of all, with the change in when we need to get this information through to the state, how does that change what's going to happen at this table? So we have a meeting coming up. I'm looking for you to fill in the blanks here.
So the state, when they gave us an extension, said they wanted to see our plan on what date?
November 18th.
November 18th. And so therefore, the next board meeting that we have on November 15th, we would have to take action in order to meet their deadline of when they get the report.
Okay, so either way, we're voting at the next meeting.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you. So my first question, we talk about a magnet in Fairfield, potentially. Is that for Fairfield residents only, or is that open to the wider community?
My intention was that would be limited to Fairfield.
Okay.
Youngsters, other K-5 youngsters from elsewhere in the district.
Okay, thank you.
And it would be helpful for me to say that. I should probably put that in there to be clear.
Yeah, please. Then the question as it relates to, I've got other questions, but these are just follow-ups on everyone else's. Busing, we said that it's reimbursed, that Fairfield pays it, but it's reimbursed. Is that correct?
No, I would look to Ms. Monsell, but I don't believe Fairfield pays.
We don't pay.
No, CES manages that through the state grant.
Okay, I thought before you had said, though, that Fairfield pays and we're reimbursed.
No.
Okay. And then I'd asked actually a couple of questions about kind of how have these two solutions impacted us over the last 5 years. So if we take a look at the second page of the memo, you've got chart number 1, the history of the racial imbalance at McKinley. One of the things I'd asked to see is what that absolute imbalance is in terms of the number of students. So right now we're at 27.2. Can you frame that for us, please, as what does that really mean to us in terms of students?
I'm going to cheat and use my calculator here. We're looking to...
Mike, please.
Sorry, excuse me. The difference between the 25% target and the 27.2 is 2.2%.
Correct.
So if the McKinley minority population were to come down by, say, 3%, what would that be?
I don't think we can do it because of the mix of the students. That's why I'm trying to understand how many kids are we over by? Are we over by 2 kids? Are we over by 8 kids? Are we over by 80 kids?
It's going to be 20-something, I think, and I'm going to just double-check myself while I'm sitting here.
Okay. Could you send out to the board the same chart, please, with 3 additional columns? One will be what's the absolute number of children that were over. So, for example, in the 10-11 year, it says 25.89%. Can you let us know that that's 1 student or 3 students or
Sure.
whatever the number is? I'd also like to see what that absolute imbalance number would look like without having had the pre-K in those 5 years or those 6 years we've got here.
If it didn't exist at all.
If it never existed. So would our absolute imbalance have actually changed? Would it have gone up or would it have gone down? In other words, has it been effective?
I know that when we, sorry to interrupt, but when we presented to the State Board of Education, I recall Dr. Teitel commenting about if none of this happened, what would be the absolute imbalance if we had not done anything. So we have that number somewhere. I just can't find it in my file. at the
Okay.
moment.
And then the third column would be the absolute imbalance without the open choice as well, please, for those
If we
6
had-
years.
If we even didn't have the 72. that we have now.
Retroactively reversed out whatever number we've had over the course of time. So we can
will do.
see if that investment has had a significant impact. The other table I'd like to see, please, is our census table, where this is the Fairfield Public School Enrollment Elementary, where we've got students by classroom.
Yes.
Could I please get on here the number of students by school, by grade level, that currently exist within the system, the 72, open
The
choice?
in other words, these kids here merged onto that page.
Do I have a copy of those kids there?
I think so, but they're not on the
Don't
same
think
page.
I do. I didn't see it in mine. Oh, wait. Is that it? My mistake?
But it's not part of the enrollment page that you're, so I see
Got
what
it.
you mean.
Okay, I didn't see
Put
that.
these
Yep,
two-
I got it.
Put these two together, in other words.
Okay. So we have 13 at Dwight, 6 at Jennings, 15 at Mill Hill, 4 at North Stratfield, 7 at Osborne Hill, and 6 at Stratfield. Is that correct?
Yes,
For-
that's
For a
what's on the
total of
page.
51.
That's correct.
Okay. So I can actually do that myself then. Thank you. In terms of the special ed, I was reading about, and in terms of the open choice now, are we reimbursed as a district every dollar over the $3,000 in tuition? Or is it we're only reimbursed after it hits the 4.5 times?
Mike, can you respond to that?
I don't follow you on when you say 4.5 times.
You're
So,
referring to the excess cost
Correct.
concept?
correct.
Are we-
I'd have to check with,
That makes a massive difference here. So that's
At
something
the
we should know.
moment, the original answer was any cost over 3,000, the sending school district absorbs that.
that was our understanding from
And then they could take
CES.
advantage of.
Yeah.
Okay, and in reading online, it says part of the costs are reimbursed. Very, very vague. I think there was more information about open choice, a year or two ago when I researched it than there is today. So the other question I have is, as it relates to, so we have 72 students now. If the proportion of special ed within those 72 students is distributed in the same fashion as it is among Fairfield students, 10, 12% are going to be receiving services of some sort. I looked through the budget and didn't see any revenue source coming from Bridgeport. Could you let us know over the last 6 years how much Bridgeport has actually reimbursed us? So it's good to say that they will reimburse us,
Have they?
but given their financial status, have they actually ever reimbursed us?
And if I could ask, perhaps whether Ms. Munsell would know this, is it a reimbursement, or is it that they absorb whatever the costs are and pay the bills directly?
I think it depends on the situation and the
Okay.
services.
And so my guess is that it's a combination of both, and so therefore, if anything that's been reimbursed from them, we should be able to get that.
Perfect, thank you. And then shifting, sorry, my notes are kind of random here, shifting back over to the pre-K. So it sounds like the cost of this experiment over the next 2 years is $174,000 on the pre-K, because you're mixing apples and oranges if you're actually taking the open choice revenue against the pre-K, because those are independent of one another.
That's true.
So we have the opportunity for revenue on one, but we're guaranteeing ourselves approximately $175,000 loss by opening the pre-K. Is that true?
Let's see here. I think that overstates it somewhat.
So we've got 140,
In other words, if I took the open choice tuition out as a separate issue,
correct,
then we'd be looking at
145 in cost,
$145,000 in
54.
cost against revenue of 54.
So that's
So that's about
91.
right.
And that's for the first year, and the second year is 83.
Right.
Okay, so just to be
And
clear.
then after that, of course, you're continuing to run, if we had 3 programs, you would have no new kids, no new revenue, except for a modest increase in tuition.
Right, and
So
I'm
we'd
gonna-
be running at that new higher level year after year.
Correct, and I'm probably going to assume that we're running our existing at a loss of something along those levels as well, or a cost. of 174 for what's
That I'd
not
have to check.
mandated. Well,
I'd have to check.
okay. The other question is, as it relates to the cuts that are going on at the state level right now. Over the last year, we received our 1.9, was it, cut? What was our cut from the state?
In ECS grant
Correct.
money, yes, about 1.9 to the town.
And my understanding is that the Open Choice received a $3 million cut, a small number on a bigger denominator there, but are we actually getting reimbursed the full $3,000 per student? If I look at last year's budget, I see that we were reimbursed, where was it? We were reimbursed for like 60 some odd kids rather than the 74. We had like, I want to say 158.
I actually think 60 was the number last year, and
60 was?
72 is the number this year.
So we went up by 12?
That's correct.
Well, that's interesting, because when we talked about that at budget season, that wasn't what was laid out to us.
Yeah,
The 12 students, excuse me, the 12 students were added again in February when we made the changes. So if you're referring to the last budget, we only had 60 students in the system.
Okay, and I'll have to go back to the budget book, but I think there was a very specific conversation about this at the last budget, and Dr. Title's intention, he said, was not to increase them significantly. I think we were going up by like 2 or 4, is what the board, I think, was told. We'll have to, if we could double check that number too. Because that's contrary to what was stated, I believe.
Other questions?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yep, here's right here. So the budget for 14-15, we had 194,000 for 65, and then we say for 15-16 we're going to be reimbursed 180,000 for 60 students. So we're already at 72. So in the budget we were told there were going to be 60 this year, I believe, rather than the 72. And I've got my budget book here. We can check that in a second. And then I guess my other question is, have we had any litigation expenses? What have our total out-of-pocket expenses been? I think that to frame this as an economic advantage to the town isn't necessarily correct. I think it is a Band-Aid that is going to have us limp around, and here we are being asked to fund several $100,000 of pre-K. You know, I think the desire to have pre-K is one thing. The desire to increase open choice is another thing. But I don't think they address the racial imbalance. I think the racial imbalance is being used to increase these. We've been questioning for a while why our schools are all being built as 504 when the projections all say we've got declining enrollment. You know, that's another concern, is where are we actually headed. So I think I'd like to understand a lot of the numbers that I've seen, or that I've requested, and I think it would be wonderful if we could please get those well ahead of the next meeting,
Fair enough.
so we have time to digest it as opposed to here at the table. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think Mr. Patton, followed by, you want to follow up, Ms. Patton, you might?
Well, just one thing that Mr. Llewellyn said, we're not building all our schools to 504, just Holland Hill and McKinley, and Mill Hill. Just two. Yes, but again, we're not doing all the schools in our district to
Clarifying a
504.
fact.
The long-term plan through 2024 has 2 more schools extended to 504, Holland Hill and Mill Hill.
Thank you.
Isn't that the intent?
It's a simple factual statement. We're not building all 11 elementary schools to 504. We're just clarifying
I
that
stand corrected. Most.
for the purpose. So, Mr. Patton.
I guess through the chair to either Dr. Tracy or Mr. Cummings. So on the open choice option that we're talking about here, where we place students is not going to violate the board enrollment policy in terms of number of students per classroom at the various grade levels that you mentioned before, correct? Like, you're not going to...
No, that's correct.
Right. So, you know, it's just putting students in, as you said, open seats. And we're not going to go and take a class that has, 21 kids and go stick 2 more students in there. You're going to go look elsewhere. So I'd just like to point out that observation for everybody who seems to get the feeling that there's going to be overcrowding in elementary schools. My other point was, it's kind of went all over the place with Mr. Walling's questions here.
Shall we come back to you?
Yeah, come back to me in a second.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, are you ready?
Yes. I had hoped by going last that a lot of my questions would be addressed. Instead, I think they've about doubled in number, so I'll try to move quickly. First, to the concern about the enrollment that Mr. Patton was just referencing, I just went through the October numbers. Based upon these, looking at kindergarten and first grade, of sections of 19 or lower, there are 13 sections of kindergarten, 21 sections of first grade, from which, if this were the reality of next year, so that's a total of 34 classrooms where we could be figuring out where 18 students could fit. Looking at the enrollment numbers of sections of kindergarten and first grade of 19 and below, there are in fact a tremendous, if that was where we were going, and we're talking about addressing the concern of hitting that 21, 22, 23, 13 sections of kindergarten are anywhere from 15 to 19, and 21 sections of first grade. So the room to which Dr. Tracy has alluded is there in good number. There's also 4 elementary schools that are not 504. Dwight, Jennings, North Stratfield, Sherman, there is no conversation moving them to 504. So we're not talking about a couple, but there are 4, to Mrs. Gerber's point. A few other statements regarding, first of all, just to follow up also on Dr. Tracy's point, and hopefully to make sure that everyone's clear that there's a very big difference between a magnet school and a magnet program, and that I wouldn't want this being reported out to the public that we were talking about making McKinley a magnet school, which would be the school in its entirety. A program would be something much more specific, much smaller. For example, if we were going to have a program on that incorporated the teaching of Arabic, the teaching of Chinese, the teaching of a very specific STEM program focus. So when we're talking about 50 students or something of that nature, that just to be clear that there's a very stark difference between school and program. To some of my other questions, this was a question that was given to me, so while I know the answer, I just want to reiterate that in reading the report that everyone's clear that these preschools are in fact open to all Fairfield students. That while this is referencing continual the McKinley students applying, just for the public's information, clarifying that the preschools are open to all. And also I was hoping that you could speak to, this is just as an education piece, the idea of using race or socioeconomic status as a criterion for enrollment in the preschool or as a criterion for enrollment for the transfer aspect, because I don't think everyone in the public is aware of that.
Well, to my knowledge, and I'll ask Mr. Cummings to correct me, I don't believe we've done that. We have not said to a family, you may or may not be in this program based on your status, either racial or economic.
And we're not allowed to.
That's the point I was getting at, is just to make sure that everyone understands that while we're trying to come up with an attractive program, in fact, what would make this, if we could use that, this could be a lot more finer instrument.
That's that together with the fact that the numbers are fairly small and the difference that we're trying to bridge, the 2.2%, is fairly small. And there's a lot of individual decisions that get made that we don't control. Makes it very difficult to fine-tune it, as you said. That's true.
One question from page 5 and involves what would be the district's idea or motivation behind the grandfathering of the Dwight preschool for four-year-olds?
My only thought there was that we ought to give the current 3-year-olds a chance to finish out where they are. It is a small program. There's a cost to running such a small program. An alternative would be to say you're eligible to participate. You're already in pre-K. We're not questioning that. But you're going to have to pick one of the other 2 sites for 17-18. This plan takes a more incremental approach and says if you're 3 now, you can stay at Dwight when you're 4, and then the program will close.
But would the transferring options still be open? Would it be open only to the one?
Somebody wanted to leave.
No, I'm talking the opt-in for any of those 18 preschoolers as 4-year-olds. Would the aspect of it that they can opt in to the Dwight school, can they remain at Dwight? Are we allowed to limit that to only the one McKinley student who is there? Is that what's...
Since there would be a program at Dwight for 4-year-olds, could a McKinley or any other 4-year-old opt into the Dwight program during its last year of operation? I hadn't thought of it. Mike, what do you think?
That was, quite honestly, the assumption that we would not disrupt that.
No,
Because then,
it's not exactly your question, though. Could you ask it again?
actually, that sort of was my question, but you rephrased it in a way that was also interesting.
Sorry, trying to be helpful. I'm being too helpful.
Yeah, you made a new question, but it was an interesting point, and now I can't repeat
Our intention was to allow anyone currently at Dwight to finish their pre-K career there without disrupting them. It doesn't have to be that way. The answer could be, no, we no longer have a program at Dwight in 17-18. We have 2 other sites, and since you're already in the program, you get first dibs to stay in. You just have to move.
Okay. And I apologize to add another thing to your list, but could we find out the cost of maintaining that so that the choice of grandfathering or not is something that we could be...
I can address perhaps partially answer that question at this point.
Okay.
There are currently 8 3-year-olds in the program. So one of the things we are considering is, especially if we give them the option to transfer to Stratfield or Burr, and they take that option, what might that final number be? And we'd have to come back to the board and look at that number and say, is this a viable program to worth continuing?
Okay.
I think it's, again, certainly part of the budget discussions going forward.
Okay. I'm just waiting because he's writing. Okay.
You want him to catch up with his notes? Is that why you're...
Well, no, if I'm going to say anything that he wants to be paying attention to, I don't want to speak.
Next question.
On that same page, on page 5, under letter B, in an effort to further enhance the impact on racial imbalance, McKinley students will be given priority in the enrollment process. And this, correct me if I was on the original Cultural Diversity Task Force. I had thought it was that free and reduced lunch got priority. That's not the case?
Can you respond to that one?
Yes.
Mr. Cummings?
Again, my experience with the enrollment at the pre-K is limited now to 2 summers. But we have been operating on essentially a first-come, first-served basis over the past couple of years, and I think even prior to that. So we open applications around the 1st of November. We try to look for a balance. Essentially, though, if you look at going back to the question of when Dr. Tracy spoke to the revenue, I built that projection on revenue from tuition based on our past percentages. So roughly a third of all students in the pre-K program now are paying full tuition. About a sixth are paying a reduced, and about half are, that's historical, and half are free.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional questions. I was wondering if there were any busing costs, if there were, any busing savings being realized by switching the busing to Stratfield as opposed to Dwight.
Because of
the way the tiering works, and if that was something that had been, it may have already been factored in. If it had not, I don't know if that would represent any, but I know Mr. Fickey has referenced, those difference of tier 1 to 2 to 3, and if this had any impact on that.
I didn't assume any such savings. I think once we get down to seeing who wants to go where, there may be an opportunity, but I didn't assume any in this plan.
Okay. And something else I wanted to speak to, because Mrs. Lou McCormick has referenced this idea of a permanent change. Again, having been on the Cultural Diversity Task Force, we spent years going through options of trying to come up with things with low cost impact. And I understand her interest in redistricting, that's what you're looking for as the permanent solution, to just say we want another idea out there. I've been up that road, down that road, on the side roads leading off that road, and I understand that what you're getting after is redistricting, but we as a board had that presentation. Redistricting is something that this board rejected, and it's a vote for us to accept that it's not the solution at this time until the renovation of Holland Hill and Mill Hill are completed. That was the recommendation of the consultants that we hired. That was what the board voted to accept. We moved forward from that. And so to keep bringing that up as you're looking for the permanent solution now, when we know that based upon the guidelines that the redistricting ad hoc committee came up with, we accepted as a board, we presented to the consultant that there was no redistricting plan that could achieve what we needed to do with the current situation at Holland Hill and Mill Hill. We have been down that road before, and to raise this ghost again, which is of course then going to get people upset because they want to know are we going down this road or not, is a very quick amnesia slap in terms of we've covered this. We hired consultants. We gave them our principles and guidelines. They brought their recommendation. We accepted those. And so the permanent solution, I understand you are greatly interested in redistricting. Mrs.
I'm
LaPointe,
not sure where you
hold on
got
one
these
second.
words
It's not
from.
your turn right now. Yes,
This is
because-
conjecture, though. She's putting
because-
words in my mouth I never
because
even
Mrs.
said.
I
Mrs. Luma
understand that
please
it
allow her
involves
to
a
finish.
certain degree of bravery to say the word redistricting. I'm not going to say the R word. You're talking about a permanent solution. Guess what the permanent solution is that everyone's going to think of? It's redistricting. The board has contemplated that, rejected it, so for you to raise the ghost of that right now is a disservice to the public.
Have you any other questions or comments that you wish to make? Not yet. Okay.
I think I have to be able to respond to that since you spoke to me for about, I think, 5 minutes.
I was about to recognize you for a comment. Do you have a comment that you wish to make, Mrs. Luma?
Yeah, first of all, I never said the words that you've said. So clearly, when you think of a permanent solution, you're thinking of redistricting. So it seems that you've acknowledged that that is the permanent solution. So if you believe that to be so, and you think everybody else agrees with that case, then, you know, I don't know what there is to say. But I do know that what we're looking at right now does not resolve the issue because we have past cases where it hasn't resolved it, and we're looking at more data just to confirm that, because I'm not clear that these are good expenditures of funds in a tight budget year, that this is actually going to resolve anything. If you think redistricting is the one permanent solution and that there is no other, well then, I don't know what to say. Then maybe you were premature in saying no to it. But perhaps there are other ones, and I would suggest that we wait and delay this, particularly until we see how our budget plays out, because we don't know how tight our funds are, and do we really want to be expending more funds? And secondly, who knows what, you know, when the new superintendent comes in, perhaps there will be thoughts on other creative solutions that might be out there. I'm not sure, but I'm also not clear. It's very much not clear to me that open choice and expanding a pre-K program at a cost to us to potentially, not even definitively, affect our racial imbalance is a good use of funds. Now, if we want to view these as on their own merit and discuss that on their own merit, but definitely not under the guise of resolving racial imbalance, because I'm not clear that that addresses the issue at hand here. And so that's why I am uncomfortable affecting a positive expenditure prior to us even understanding where our budget is at this point in time. And it concerns me because I've yet to see data that actually will confirm that our racial imbalance will actually 100% be resolved by doing the changes that we're proposing. But we do 100% know that we will have an expenditure.
Thank you. Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, I guess through the chair to Mrs. Lou McCormick, I would be very interested to see what ideas you have. I mean, this is not, excuse me, let me finish first. This is not a new topic that this board has just all of a sudden this morning woken up and said, oh, we have to deal with racial imbalance. Most of us have been on this board for at least 3 years, and this topic has come up multiple times. So at this stage in the game, I would say if there was another option, I would imagine that Dr. Tracy and Mr. Cummings and the rest of the staff would have come up with something. So perhaps if you have some new, interesting, exciting idea that you would like to share with us, I think now is the time to do it, because it's been made very clear to us tonight that we need to vote on this because the state needs to get a report on November 18th. To say we need to delay and we need more time, We don't. We have a month to be able to come up with something, but I think now is the time, since you obviously have some idea, perhaps if you do not think redistricting is the option. That was my takeaway as well, that you believe redistricting is the option. But if there is something else, please share it with us now. We need to have this answer now, not a month from now when we're voting and then you're going to vote against it or vote to delay. That's not going to help us. The state needs this report on November 18th.
Can I respond?
Mrs. Lou McCormick.
So we have had discussions about it. It's not as if I haven't spoken with the interim superintendent. And I think that the concept that we have a new superintendent coming in is a reasonable request to make of the state to say that perhaps there are new ideas and that she might have a different perspective. Now, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for an extra few months. I don't. And if they absolutely come back and say no, I mean, that's fine. I just don't believe that these solutions, particularly the open choice, even more so than the not redistricting, the pre-K program, I'm not sure what it accomplishes. And I do believe that it attracts a whole set of issues that we can't clearly define at this point in time. So, whereas I still haven't said redistricting is the solution, if you all truly believe that it is, then, I don't know what to say, but at the end of the day, it is a solution, and if somebody wanted to review it, they could. But I do say, given this, I don't think open choice is a solution. And I do believe that perhaps someone else and perhaps a new, fresh perspective coming in would be good, because oftentimes when new people come in, they do bring new ideas, they take a fresh look at it, and that can happen. So I know she's been part of the conversation, and maybe there are thoughts. So I don't think it's a bad idea to request that.
Mr. Dwyer, just to be clear, you have spoken to the state and asked for an extension, correct? And the only extension they granted was that Dr. Jones will have a month before she has to go to the state to present. They are aware of the fact that we do have a new superintendent starting on December 5th, and the only accommodation they are willing to make is to make sure that she has some time before the presentation. But the actual physical presentation itself is due to the state on November 18th, and the state is not willing to budge on that. And also, Dr. Jones has been a part of discussions. She met with Dr. Tracy, Dr. Title, and yourself more than once, correct? Discussing racial imbalance.
Correct. If I could, I have some comments, but if you have other comments, I'll wait until everybody has talked. I don't know which of the two of you, while I was...
Matt has been waiting for quite a while.
It's because he forgot last time.
I checked you off, but okay. So I'll go with... No, I put initials down here and then cross off when I think...
Quite all right.
Mark Patton, followed by Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
The questions that I had before that I misplaced.
My apologies. Yes, I remember we asked if you wanted to give some more time. Correct. Yes.
So through the chair to either Dr. Tracy or again Mr. Cummings, do we have data for the existing last whatever years that we've done open choice for the 60 plus kids that whatever year they've come into the program, have they stayed? What percentage has stayed through to graduation?
We do have the data. I don't have it in front of me right now.
The report says assuming attrition of 4 open choice students each year.
Right, that's all it says. That's kind of a
I took your question to be one of historical.
Right,
what
historical.
Has actually happened.
So, I mean, it sounds like that, we're trying to get this next batch of 18 times 2 years worth of students to come in, as you said, from K to first grade, so they can matriculate through the system and stay in one spot, as opposed to popping in for a year or so and then vanishing. So, right, for continuity, that would be the goal of the program. Otherwise, the program doesn't seem to have a benefit to the student, right?
Right. The goal is for them to stay from whenever they start right through graduation. Anecdotally, we can certainly answer your question in terms of what's the persistence experience, how many youngsters stay for how long, how many ultimately have graduated from one of our high schools. There's at least 2 things that I'm told cause youngsters to leave us as they get to the secondary level. One is at any time if the family moves out of Bridgeport, they're out of the program. So that,
Right.
we lose kids that way.
Certainly that makes sense.
And then at some point, and again, this is anecdotal, that youngsters are thinking about being in high school and being on teams and activities with kids from their own neighborhood, and that may cause them to depart from Fairfield. But I'm assuming we can get the records out and answer the question historically, as youngsters have come in, how many have stayed for how long?
So in your plan proposed to the state, do we get, you were kind of vague, do we get a choice on who we accept? In other words, if we get, 30 kids and only 6 of them are K in first grade, can we say we only want the K in first graders and give us some more? We don't want the older kids? Like, in other words, how does that work?
I'll let Mr. Cummings comment. I believe we get to decide where the seats are. We don't get to pick individual kids, but why don't you?
That is correct. The districts that receive open choice students identify the slots. Some districts like Fairfield will identify certain grade levels. And they, in addition to the slots, by slots we mean the school and the grade. Other districts may have a more, K-12 approach and take anybody, but the school, it's up to the receiving district to set those conditions.
So that would be the goal for this program, is to try and hit the mark with K or first grade.
That's right. That's correct.
Right. So
I don't think we've ruled out taking youngsters in the higher elementary grades. We're definitely focused on elementary, and the priority is K and 1. But I don't think we've said, at least in the plan, that it would be exclusively K1.
no, I mean that's why you're saying 18
Right.
of the students in your plan, right, as opposed to 28. But so I guess going forward, if we're going to try and do 18-ish for 1 year and then 18 for the next year, and then the following, why wouldn't we kind of adapt the program to do that every year and start at those younger grades to matriculate through? I mean, that certainly might put us over the 100 student mark, but wouldn't that be a more common sense approach to massaging that program going forward to maximize the vacant seats, or minimize costs and that sort of thing?
To take an extra, and just for the record, it's 14 students times 2.
I'm sorry, 14 times 2,
For a
not
total
18.
28.
Right.
But to take 14 additional students every year,
In other words, if we're doing 14 in 2017 and 14 in 2018, and then 2019 we're going to wing it and just say wherever we.
well, this plan only looks down the road 2 years. to say
Right.
Plus 14 and plus 14.
So if we were doing it and adding, again, an additional amount of students, again, trying to keep to those lower grades where we have seats, and doing it every year that way, wouldn't we kind of tick the needle towards, the racial imbalance the opposite way a little more by continuing that?
All else being equally, I think yes. That would depend on how many youngsters are, departing at the higher grades, but you could.
I mean,
do
again,
that.
and you would certainly, again, hit over 100 by the time you've, gone through
Exactly.
6 or 7 years, but then you would certainly move the needle more than 0.5%.
The more kids you bring in, and the longer they stay, the more the needle moves. This plan only looks to get to 100 district-wide, 72 kids K-5 over the next 2 years. That's as far as I went with it. The board and the superintendent could decide to go further.
Right. I mean, I think part of all these choices that you presented, to some of my fellow board members' points, it is, partially a money issue, as in how much money are we willing to spend per budget year to solve this problem that the state's not just going to let us, make it kind of go away. So, I mean, is it the, $41,000, a year more, or is it more than that? I mean, we don't know what the repercussions are by not being compliant. It just means we keep, getting cited by the state, more and more, and we have to spend more staff time, trying to figure these things out, which in a sense, costs money as well. So I would think that that's, when you get those, the one-page sheet of all the numbers of the cost for these things, and you're only going out 2 years, that's something to think about.
Thank you. Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, followed by Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Perfect. So to clarify a couple things that were stated earlier, in terms of allowing Dr. Jones time to come in and kind of give greater input than she's otherwise had the opportunity to. Nothing's actually changed. They've moved back the meeting, but our due date is still our due date, and we still need to vote at the next meeting. So them pushing that meeting back gives her more time to get up to speed on what's being presented. But either way, this board needs to vote on it in November is what I think you confirmed. So is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so no change there. In terms of to clarify the redistricting report by McBride, I don't think they actually came up with a recommendation. I think that was the committee's recommendation. I think they presented alternatives, but they, I don't believe, said that we couldn't redistrict. I think that was a choice taken by the members of that committee presented to the wider board. And yes, it was voted on, but I don't think they came up with a comment there. I think it's also misstated.
Can I clarify just
Please
a
do.
moment? Their job was not to recommend to
I'm just correcting the
redistrict
record.
or not redistrict. Their job was to say, if you want to take that solution as the solution to racial imbalance, one, it doesn't work until both schools get built out, and two, that when they are both built out, you might be talking about moving 700-800 students from one district to another district in order to create a, let's say, a decade-long solution. And I think the board at the time said, we're not interested in spot redistricting to solve this problem for 1 or 2 years. So I think that's the information they put forward.
And they didn't say there was no solution. They presented some solutions, and what you said is correct. There's definitely a solution.
There were scenarios,
Okay.
correct.
The other point of clarification here, going to looking at our October 1st enrollment, if we were to look at Dwight first grade, we have 6 students there who are open choice. We have a total of 51 students across 3 sections. Had those 6 students not been here, we could have actually had 2 sections. Not ideal, obviously. 22, 23 would be the enrollment, which would be up toward the max, but we do have 20 at Burr, and we've got 21 at Osborne Hill. So to say that there is no cost, would we have broken it down and had 15 kids in each of those? Possibly. At Jennings we have 15, 15, and 16. But let's just be clear, there is opportunity cost and the real cost, and we can mince words here. But that is a situation, and Dwight average teacher salary is going to be around just shy of $80,000. You also have an assistant at some cost, and I'm not sure what that cost is. But those 2 staff members alone probably wipe out everything that comes in. Now, would we have 3? We might have 3 anyway. So it's an academic argument, but that is the situation that we can be in when we start to ramp up number of students. People just have to understand, eyes wide open, this is not a net revenue game. This is a decision that folks are taking, and I'm not even sure that the decision belongs to here at this board. If the state wants to mandate it, that's great. If it should go to a referendum for the wider town, maybe it should. I'm not sure. This is more of a social concept than it is an educational concept as it relates to the Fairfield students. Yes, it's bettering a wider group, but that's just my view on that.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Thank you. My final comment, because I don't find coy amusement or feigned surprise to be very productive when you're having to vote on a plan. I would like to request through the chair to Mrs. Lou McCormick that she have her permanent solution, which you explicitly referenced. We need a permanent solution. I would like you to get that to the board for the Friday packet, because as Mr. Llewellyn has requested of Dr. Tracy, that we have the information well in advance of our vote in order to contemplate all the details to all the questions that he's asked. And I would like to make a similar request of you, that you have your permanent solution to this board well in advance of the meeting. And since you were apparently so surprised at the sudden mention of the word redistricting, then clearly myself and Mrs. Gerber and anybody else thinking the same thing were wrong, and therefore I have no problem admitting I'm wrong. So I would like that clarified, and I would like to be redirected to what the permanent solution is that will work for the McKinley racial imbalance that has not yet been brought before this board. And I look forward to getting that from you, because I will also remind, through the chair, to Mr. Llewellyn, that that idea of the not the recommendation, but in looking through the plan, and looking at the possibilities of redistricting, I don't believe there was any plan that worked that didn't involve violating principles. Was that correct? Mrs. Gerber, if you don't mind my asking, Mr. Dwyer?
Correct. The scenarios that they put forward followed the principles that the committee put out there, and the only thing that they found could come close to those principles, meeting most but not all, was their last one, which said you really can't do it till the 2 schools are done.
So again, just to clarify, that there was nothing, and unless people have principles that are that flexible, which I try not to, I'd like people to know what my principles are and stand by them. But according to those principles that that ad hoc committee came up with, that this board voted on, that we sent to the consultant, there was no redistricting plan that would solve this. And let's also be clear, any redistricting plan that we do then pursue also comes with a price tag. So there's no free solution to this at all. There's certainly not one that fits with our principles. But again, I'd just like to reiterate through the chair to Mrs. Lou McCormick, I look forward to receiving, well in advance of the meeting, the permanent solution you would propose, which is not redistricting, since apparently I was wrong about that.
I don't want to piggyback on something that you just said.
I think Mrs. Gerber was asked to clarify something by Mrs. Lou McCormick.
By Mrs.
Well,
Mexican.
I'm going to respond to Ms. Kennelly first.
Can I just?
So I will recognize Mrs. Gerber, and then I'll go to you.
Well, I just to go back to all of the different redistricting scenarios that Malone and McBroom presented to us. There were 3 that were outright said not viable long-term solutions in big red letters underlined. There was scenario D, which was a consideration. However, that would get both Holland Hill and McKinley close to impending imbalance within 3 years, I believe. The only 2 scenarios that had any long-term validity were options E and F, which could only be done with both Mill Hill and Holland Hill's renovations complete. And that would require an enormous redistricting of many students. It would impact almost every single elementary school and every feeder pattern in the district. But again, that would not be able to take place until now. I believe the new long-term facilities plan has Mill Hill not complete until 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Lou McCormick.
So let's just be clear. I never mentioned this evening anything about redistricting, except you mentioned it first. So I'm responding to your comments that it was a permanent solution. But in keeping to that, when we examined on the committee the different alternatives, they were a limited set of alternatives. So if the board would like to, we could reopen the whole topic and re-examine it. If the board doesn't want to open it, then I'm not going to bother wasting my time presenting it to a board that's not interested in considering it. So I think that pretty much is it. If the board is actually really interested in looking at alternatives of redistricting, then I would spend my time looking at it. And if you're not really interested in redistricting at all as a consideration, then let's not waste our time. I think there are probably many, many, many different alternatives to consider. McBroom considered probably a handful. And so I think at the end of the day, if we have to think about it seriously, do we want to actually examine other creative alternatives? Do we want to engage the new incoming superintendent in this process? Do we think that we already have it down and we know best based on this? I think we can continue to do more, but I would only spend time if the board actually is open to considering redistricting or in fully engaging on some other area, which I am open to. I just don't know that the open choice resolves the issue. And if you look at open choice is basically redistricting kids from another town to our town versus redistricting within our own town. The concept of moving students from one location to the other to massage numbers is basically what's going on here, right? Because that's what our objective is. And whether we like it or not, there's going to be movement, whether it's from another town to our town, within our town. Somehow we have to finagle numbers so that we meet this hurdle. I think it would have been nice if we could have gone back to the state and they had been more receptive of the concept that McKinley was happy and that they like what their population is. But if they're not, and we insist on enforcing this 25%, I don't know that this is a permanent solution, and I am loath to approve spending more money given that we don't even know where our budget is for this coming year. And if we approve spending more money to resolve this and find that we have to cut student programs, I think that would be a very, very sad outcome. And if there are other alternatives and we want to spend more time, I think, you know, you can look at something once, you can look at it twice. That doesn't mean that the third, fourth, fifth time doesn't come up with a different solution. I mean, that's why we have different people with different perspectives, because when they come in, they bring new ideas. Maybe they've seen something. That's why I was hoping that the new superintendent would come in with some new thoughts. I have ideas, but I can't do them in isolation. Clearly, something like this would have to be done with the buy-in of everybody wanting to move towards something that we think could be better. If we truly believe that there is nothing better than this, then let's not waste our time, I suppose. But my opinion is that I think we could use a little more time looking at other alternatives.
Mrs. Gerber, and then if I guess I can't. Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, followed by Mr. Llewellyn.
Well, as someone who's been going to Board of Education meetings for about 15 years now, I would say that it's no secret to people at the state of Connecticut that people at McKinley are very happy where they are. So that has been explained, and I don't believe the state really cares particularly regarding that. I think they're happy there, but they still have this racial imbalance concern. And I would just reiterate what Mrs. Maxon Kennelly said, seeing as Mrs. Lou McCormick specifically referenced other areas. I would like to hear what these other areas are. As a member of the Ad hoc Redistricting Committee, I would assume that you would have done some advance work a year ago, and so I would be very interested to hear your thoughts if you do not want to redistrict, which I apologize for.
I said I hadn't considered it. Yeah, I hadn't gone through the details of a particular proposal. I hadn't said anything about it, to be honest. I just said I wasn't happy with this.
Continue, please.
Okay, well, now I'm very confused because I thought that Mrs. Lou McCormick had said that she didn't want to consider redistricting, and now she's saying she does want to consider redistricting. In any event, whether it's redistricting or other areas, I think now is the time. If we know that we must have this plan to the state by November 18th, we have a month. In that month, I would hope that Mrs. Lou McCormick would be able to explain what these other areas are. I would be very interested in hearing what those other areas are, whether they include redistricting, which she may in fact be open to, or not. I would like to hear what they are, and I would imagine other people on the board would like to hear what they are.
Thank you. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
To follow up on that, Mrs. Lou McCormick, you just used the phrase, you have lots of ideas.
I wonder if I might interrupt for a moment.
I'm going to finish with this.
May I interrupt for a moment?
May I just finish the statement? Because Mrs. Lou McCormick is ducking, and this is an important issue that people are passionate about. She just said, verbatim, I have lots of ideas. Quote, I wrote it down. I'm just saying, I want to hear them. I am interested in hearing them. I don't want to wait till November 15th to hear them.
Okay.
And so I'm not done. I'm not done.
But don't put words in my mouth.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. I
Would you
wrote down the
finish up
quote.
your comment, please?
Lots
The corner
of
here, come on.
ideas. So please share the lots of ideas. And just to be clear, it doesn't matter who's happy or not. There's a state law. So to go to the next level, go to your state reps, go to your state senator, and ask them to change this law coming from the 60s, which is from which this derives. But without the state law changing, someone being happy or not is irrelevant. So please share with us the lots of ideas that would represent a permanent solution. I'm eager to hear them.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Well, I'm glad we're all going at each other here. This is nice. A couple questions for you. What happens if we don't have a solution for the state right now? And when was the last time a town didn't have it, and what was the outcome?
I don't know. Well,
I mean,
I
at the end of the day,
that I speak to,
at the end of the day, they're asking us to spend money to not fix a problem. They're asking us to come up with a solution, and the only solution that anyone's ever been able to come up with is adding kindergarten and increasing open choice. Both, great ideas that the state really supports. But at the same time, that's costing this district money, clearly. Given that this state manages its finances so well, I believe we're second only to Puerto Rico in terms of our financial affairs. So, interesting there. Next question. In terms of the comment made about redistricting and violating principles, ultimately, if a redistricting needs to occur, those principles will be violated. So that's kind of an interesting concept. The other question is, as it relates, so we've got Riverfield. Riverfield has 78 open seats. Stratfield has 85 open, 85 open seats. This is enrollment versus functional, I get that. Do we still have that whole wing at Riverfield? The 5th grade wing that was slow to renovate, has that been populated or is that still vacant?
Oh, no, down in the pod area?
Yes.
That's full of classrooms.
It's full of classrooms? Okay, so we've got a lot of capacity at Riverfield. A solution is to pick up several streets in the McKinley area and move a portion of those students to Riverfield. Now, that's a solution. We have 85 vacant seats. Is it palatable? It may not be, but it's a possibility. We also have Stratfield, which is abutting McKinley. They have 85 vacant seats versus functional capacity. To move a couple of streets there, also quite possible. I don't know. I don't have the demographic information, the raw data that the consultant looked at. But there are options out there, and they're clearly not going to be palatable to folks. But those aren't long bus rides compared to what we do with some of our other students, moving them over to Dwight and Burr. So we should tone it down here in terms of the back and forth at each other and try and actually look at a way to solve the solution rather than playing politics here about using the redistricting word. Look, if that's what's going to end up happening, that may be what ends up happening. But I think there are probably other ways to solve this, but people have to be willing to.
If I could make my comments now and perhaps close out the conversation, which has been good, although spirited at times. Our original proposal to the state was, we are hiring a new superintendent. Could you give us until spring of 2017 so that it wasn't the new superintendent has to start working on a plan the moment she gets here. Forget the budget, forget getting to know the school district, forget any of those other things, focused only on this. The state did not accept our idea on that and said, we want you here in November, realizing that it was going to be, December, realizing it was 48 hours after the person started. They said, okay, we'll do January, but we still need the plan at a certain time. And so the concept of a delay is not something the State Board of Education is interested in, because they take seriously the concept of racial imbalance, and they don't want any school district to just say, well, we're too busy, we'll get to it eventually. Delay is not something they're happy with at all. Number two, we have always been a couple of points, 2-3 percentage points over the 25% limit. And so this board, for a decade, has said, rather than approach a massive forced redistricting that none of our elementary schools want, especially McKinley does not want, are there things that we can do that will just get us under the 2%, under the 3%, so that we're not making a massive disruption to our school system? And that's how the whole redistricting plan started, to say, well, if we do preschool, that will help us. And we've been playing catch-up. The state knows that that's what we've been playing. But it has been multiple boards that have wanted to use this incremental approach rather than go down the road of a massive redistricting of any kind. The third principle that we've had is that we want to approach this on a voluntary basis. We don't want to go to any group of parents or schools and say, well, the state tells us we have to do this, so you lose. The fourth thing I would mention is that this board, over successive boards with different members on it, have always rejected the idea of spot redistricting, as Mr. Llewellyn just mentioned. We'll move a couple of streets here, and then a couple of years later, we'll move another couple of streets, and maybe we'll move a street back because the people who happen to move into that street were a different racial makeup than the ones that we moved. So spot redistricting, multiple boards have rejected that idea. And so I don't presume that we ought to put that into this plan, because I don't presume that the opinion of this board has changed substantially on that issue. But certainly if a majority of this board wanted to go down that path, you'd have to give us information that says, no, let's try Mr. Llewellyn's idea. The last time I believe Mr. Llewellyn raised that, it was clear that spot redistricting was not something that the majority of the board wanted to go down the path of. The purpose of this racial imbalance plan, I think I know that I generally am not looking for as much numerical detail and data as some board members are. But I think we have to first remember what is the purpose of this plan. And that is to convince the state that we are making efforts, that we cannot make a permanent solution until we are able to renovate the 2 schools and address redistricting at that time, but that in the meantime, we will also look at, instead of just preschool, the open choice program and the magnet program. Thank you for correcting. It's not a magnet school, it's a magnet program, as another way of incrementally making a difference to keep us under the 25%. So we, from the very beginning, I think this board directed the superintendent to continue down the path of finding short-term interim solutions, because we know the, quote, permanent solution cannot be done, according to the consultants we hired, until those 2 schools have been constructed. There was a comment about if we're doing this for economic benefit. No, we're not. I think the economics is what they are. We have always approached, I believe, that this preschool approach or open choice approach is the least costly. It will cost us something, but as opposed to an alternative solution of redistricting in any fashion, once you start addressing the grandfathering question, do we redistrict a kid who's in his last year at an elementary school, and generally this board has not wanted to disrupt that child at just their last year, so then we start engaging in extra busing costs. And so economics have always been viewed as what is the least costly solution so that we can get the state to give us more time to study a quote, permanent solution. So I would ask this board just how much data they really need in order to say, will this plan accomplish the goal, which is convincing the state to give us more time? I think there's enough information in here for the state for them to say yes to, and I'm not sure how much data is really needed. I do agree with the 2 comments that are made. One of the reasons that this open choice program levels of participation sheet was given to the board. We are the lowest suburban school in terms of percentage of our district that we make available to open choice students. There is a social purpose to expanding those opportunities, forgetting racial imbalance. There's just a responsibility, I think, that every district in this state has to try and address the isolation that occurs in Bridgeport or New Haven or Hartford. And if we're at 0.6% and the median is around 1.7%, we could accept more than 100. But once we started talking about going bigger than 100, Connecticut and Fairfield is the land of steady habits, and so therefore pushing that number too fast, too quickly, is probably not in our best interest. Let's push it a little bit, see if we absorb those students in terms of the impact on individual classrooms or individual teachers, and maybe a year or 2 from now, we might find that, yeah, we can go up to the average of DERG B for the number of open choice students, which would then, if that happened, instead of a half a point, that might be a point. And a point would be about half of our problem at the moment when you look at 27% versus 25%. And so the state also likes, because I've been the one that goes before the board, they like it when we show honest attempts to resolve this issue and address another issue at the same time. An honest attempt to address racial imbalance, but also add preschool education, which people value. Address racial imbalance and address open choice in a more thoughtful way, in a more aggressive way, and be not at the bottom of the list, but in the middle of the list. I think that will present well to the State Board of Education and cause them to say, thank you, you've done your job, we'll see you a year or two from now. Because that's what our goal is, to make an incremental improvement that allows the superintendent, and maybe if I quickly threw a question to either Mr. Cummings or Dr. Boyce, forgetting racial imbalance, if this district said, why don't we implement a magnet program? How many months or years would you say of study and planning in order to implement it would it normally take to kind of do that kind of a program? If somebody wants to guess at that.
I don't have the familiarity with what happened in Greenwich when they did something similar that I'd like to have to really answer that question, but I would think that to do this well, you'd want to survey your public, get some sense of what the most viable options that will bring people in, and I would think from a budgeting perspective, probably a minimum of 2 years.
Which means the third fiscal year.
Yeah, a year to study and a year to build the budget and do any staffing changes, any facility changes, and then move it in the third year.
And so I think our new superintendent, when Dr. Jones arrives, is not likely to be able to come up with an idea that could be fully vetted in 2 or 3 months to get to next spring. I think it's going to take longer for her to do that. Every conversation I've had in this state, and this will be my last comment, with different school districts who have had to resolve this issue, whether it's West Hartford, Greenwich, ourselves, a couple of others, it would appear magnet program and redistricting are the two solutions that all of them have gravitated to. None of them, no matter how many years they've studied it, have come up with a third best alternative other than the preschool, which is an incremental approach. So there may be other ideas out there, but at the moment, the various school districts who have looked at this issue seem to have gravitated that those are really the only 3 alternatives, but perhaps there are others, and some internet search, and maybe you'll be able to find some. So those are my comments.
Phil, can I ask you to clarify something?
Yep, please.
In your comments, thank you. So you said, where would you see as a good percentage for Fairfield to get to? Your view of open choice?
I hate to be at the bottom of a list of districts that have a degree of social responsibility for their neighbors. And so therefore, from my point of view, of the 13 or so numbers that are on there, if you took the midpoint of those 13 schools and said we're in the middle of the pack, that would make me feel better than being at the bottom of the pack.
And where is that number, since you've looked at it?
I think it's about 1.7. I think the median, I think, is West Hartford, 1.71.
So
that was my just quick math.
That's 170 for Fairfield.
Could be, yeah.
Okay, so going from 60 some odd, or 72 to 170, so going up by about 100 is what you're saying? Okay, and then you made a comment that said the only 2 solutions you've ever seen work are magnet and redistricting.
The only 2 solutions that other districts have taken a serious look at. Not that I've seen,
but that have worked, you said.
Correct.
So why are we going on a tangent here? Because what you've said is that you've talked about social responsibility, and that gets back to my comment about referendum.
Absolutely.
This isn't education. This is up to the town, not up to 9 members to decide what the social responsibility of a town should be. Just for clarification, thank you.
The districts that have looked at it have looked primarily at redistricting and magnet programs, and And our district, when you throw it in the mix of those 4 or 5, have looked at preschool programs. So 3 have been looked at, but the other districts have focused on the other 2.
But preschool hasn't worked and the others have, you said.
Well, if you redistrict, it, you know, it quote, works, but at what cost?
Well, if the state wants to pursue its desire because they know better than the parents of the town, well, then so be the case.
Oh, and I'll make one other comment. It is not in any district's best interest, I think, to tell the state of Connecticut that we're not interested in following state law. And so the idea of asking, so what if we just said, we're not going to respond, what are you going to do to us? That's probably not in our best interest.
Or what if we were to say our plan is as follows, and it's going to take us 3 years to implement it, as opposed to throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars of mandates at it? I think it's the approach because of your view of what our social responsibility is.
No, I was separating the 2 issues. Yeah, I'm separating those 2 issues. Other comments that people want to make? Can I make this one last round? Is there anybody other than Ms. Carnell that wants to make one last comment? If not, Ms. Carnell, you have the last word.
I'm just, maybe you know the background on this, but in the data we received, it gave us the racial imbalance, or I should say the history of the racial imbalance at McKinley. And it seems like 4 years ago, they were just under the 25%. Other than that, they've always been above. This past year, almost the highest. But I guess the question is, what has happened previously when we've been above? How have the state intervened, and how have we responded to the state? And also, in the year that we were fortunate enough to be below, was it just luck of the way the neighborhoods were, the redistricting, you know, how the neighborhood stood, or was there something in particular that we did that helped it to go below the 25%?
So our multiple year plans to them, dating back to 2009-10, the opt-in to McKinley, hoping that we might get families to come into McKinley that will change the balance there, opt-out from McKinley, and preschool. Those are the 3 that we have operated under. And yes, in 1 year, that got us underneath the 25%. But for the most part, it kept us close. And in a couple of years where it kept us very close to the 25%, the state said, we're not going to send you a letter this year because you're so close. But those are the 3 options that have been part of the base plan ever since.
So we have used the opt-in and opt-out in the past, obviously. Is that still a choice that's offered? It is.
In the
So
plan.
even, right.
Yeah.
So even though it's being offered, we're not, the both of you. What?
If I could just clarify,
Please.
the opt-out option, if I could call it that,
Say that 3
was
times
discontinued after 2012-13 because it wasn't helping us. Interestingly enough, the opt-in option at the moment is not helping us because of the 24 youngsters who have opted into McKinley, 13 were minority youngsters.
Right. So wait a minute. Now you confused me even more. You just said, Dr. Tracy, if I'm following you, it was the 2012-13?
At the end of 2012-13, the opt-out from McKinley was discontinued.
But that was the 1 year, if I'm following you, or is it a year behind? Is it lagging? Because that was the 1 year we were below the racial imbalance.
My sense is there were probably many factors that led to the results you see in 2012-13. The opt-out from McKinley program did not contribute to more minority youngsters opting out than white youngsters opting out. Part of what goes on here is that, you know, we're taking the steps that we can take, but you're also working against the tides of demography. You know, what kind of housing is built where, who moves in where, and so it could very well have been, and I don't know, that those trends just worked in our favor that year. What I do know is the particular strategy of opting out from McKinley wasn't contributing to racial balance, and therefore was discontinued.
Have we thought of bringing it back, or it just, is that another option?
I haven't thought of it, but
I mean, that was what I'm sorry, what? Right, but if, as Dr. Tracy pointed out, the demographics can change. There's so many external factors that we just have no control over. Is that another option to look at? No pun intended, opting in, opting in.
Certainly something we could talk about. One of the things I think you're seeing here, the chairman and others have referred to it, is that there are a lot of families who are very happy to be at McKinley, and their attitude is, we don't have a racial diversity. We are diverse. It's the rest of the
Like it's
district
the
that's
rest
out of
of-
line,
right.
and I'm not interested in leaving. In fact, you have some youngsters, I think 2 or 3, who actually moved elsewhere in the town and opted back in to McKinley. So, to the credit of that school, it does pose challenges when you're trying to meet a state-imposed
Right.
quota.
I think we should just look at all options,
Could
and that's
look at
another
it.
one that we should be exploring.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the conversation. We will get the information as it's available, and this will be on for an action item at our next regular meeting. Item 6A, approval of the school calendar. Let me put the recommended motion on the table that the Board of Education approve the 2017-2018 school calendar. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli. Do you have any comments that you wish to make, Dr. Tracy?
Only to thank Dr. Parks for her work on this. I think there were 1 or 2 changes that were considered, but the ultimate decision was to stick with what was initially recommended, and perhaps you want to comment on why that is.
Yes, at the last meeting,
And for the TV audience,
still can't hear me? What is wrong?
Tell us who you are.
state your
Oh,
name.
sorry. Karen Parks, Interim Deputy Superintendent. Yes, at the last meeting, I think Mrs. Maxon Cannelli asked about October 17th and 18th. That's a Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday, we had on the calendar that it was a shortened day for elementary and middle school, an early dismissal, so the afternoon could be teacher professional development. On Wednesday, October 18th, we had a shortened day, early dismissal for the high schools, so that the teachers could have professional development in the afternoon. And that just began last year because of the administration of PSATs, and we feel that after PSATs, most of the kids are useless in the afternoon. So it's not really beneficial to have classes, but we can definitely take advantage of the time for professional development for teachers. Mrs. Maxon Cannelli made the suggestion that perhaps we combine the two, which on the surface sounded like a great idea because high schoolers could be home for families to help take care of the younger children who would not be in school. The problem with that is that Tuesdays are our meeting days, so it's an extended day. So actually, by having a shortened day, you get a much longer block of time for professional development. So the middle schools and elementary schools were not really willing to do that, to give up that additional time. The high schools are not interested in moving to Tuesday because they want to not have classes after PSATs, and they're locked into the October 18th date. The other complication is that our secondary curriculum leaders do a lot of the professional development with the teachers and are planning to work with the teachers on those dates. Secondary curriculum leaders cover both the middle school and the high school teachers. So by having the middle school's early dismissal on Tuesday and the high school's on Wednesday, all of our teachers get the benefit of working with their departmentalized curriculum leaders, so that the secondary curriculum leaders can work with the middle school teachers on Tuesday and the high school teachers on Wednesday. So although it sounded like a great idea, we would really prefer to stay with the recommended professional development as it was presented on the draft that you received.
Other questions that board members have? Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just very quickly, through the chair to Mrs. Parks, and thank you for getting me all of that feedback in advance, so I did have time to read and reflect on my own thinking behind this. So again, thank you for that feedback.
You're welcome.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Carnell.
Through the chair to Ms. Parks, just a quick question. In September, we have 2 Jewish holidays. One, the kids have off. The second one falls on a Saturday.
Yes.
So I know historically, like if it's July 4th falls on a Saturday, you get the Friday off. Or if it falls Sunday, you get the Monday off. Are we giving the calendar one less day at the end of the year because of the way the Jewish holiday? Because I know those have been counted in
Yeah,
to the
so-
holidays.
Yeah, so the way we actually develop the schedule is we know that we have 182 school days, so we just count them out. So we just run them out. So if you look on that calendar, you'll see at the, I don't have it in front of me, but my memory tells me that in the upper right-hand corner above each month, there is parenthetically the number of school days, and we just make sure that, considering all the days off from school, that we end up with the right total. And that's just how we do it. We count it out. So yes.
So it just came out.
Yep.
They benefited at the end of the year as
Yes.
opposed.
Yep. School days, school is one day shorter than this year, yes, over the calendar.
Any other questions from board members on the school calendar? Mr. Patton.
I'm going to bring up a variation of this topic in our budget discussion in a minute, but for professional development, depending on what type of professional development it is, I know some is done, some things can be done during the summer. Is there contractual issues with how much professional development can be done in the summer, depending on how long something takes? Or when a teacher, has to work? I know obviously, teachers, work the school calendar year, but, they have to come in a week early and stay to clean up and all that sort of stuff. How
Yeah,
does that-
so contractually, the teachers' calendars and the paraprofessionals' calendars, they all designate contractually how many days they work. So that drives the calendar. We have 2 full days of professional development built into the teacher's calendar, which are embedded in the school year. So that means that's why they have 182 days across the school year. The summer is really dictated by the budget, because we pay teachers to come in for professional development in the summer, unless it's something that we can manage to do without paying them, which typically doesn't happen. So really so for example, some of the work that we do in the summer is training, curriculum writing, and that comes before you in the budget. We always project how much it's going to cost, and you'll see that curriculum writing comes out in the salary line, because we have contractually, the teachers get paid a specific hourly rate for writing curriculum in the summer. So it really is dependent upon how much money we're willing to request in the budget as to how much professional development we can accomplish in the summer.
So, all right, I'll continue my train of thought in the next topic, and you'll see where I'm going with
Okay.
this. Thanks.
Any other questions on the calendar? Seeing no hands raised, I'll go out to the community for any comments. This is a voting item on the vote to approve the 2017-2018 school calendar. Anybody wish to come forward? Seeing nobody, then back to the board for adoption, that the Board of Education approve the 2017-2018 school calendar. As moved and seconded, please raise your hands if you are in approval of those. It is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
6B, adoption of policies. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education adopt policies 5111 and 5113. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly moves. Mrs. Gerber seconds. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, do you have any comments?
No, I received no questions, so I'm assuming that it was self-explanatory as is, but I don't have anything else to add.
Any questions from the board on adoption of these 2 policies? The policies were handed out at the last board meeting, so you have copies from that meeting. Seeing nobody raise their hands, out to the public, that the Board of Education adopt policies 5111 and 5113. Any member of the public wish to make a comment on adoption of either of those 2 policies? Back to the board. All in favor that the Board of Education adopt policies 5111 and 5113, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 7, new business, discussion of the 17-18 budget ideas from BOE members. I think Dr. Tracy wants to make some opening comment, and then why don't we just go around the table and and surface whatever ideas that you may want to present for the superintendent's consideration in adopting the budget. Dr. Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few comments to set the context, and these remarks are similar to those that I shared with our district-wide leadership team in this room a couple of weeks ago. One, I want you to know that I've already begun working with Dr. Jones, since she's going to be picking up the budget task come December, and she's been able to be in town for a few days, and when she's not in town, we're on the phone, and that's going to continue as the various budget meetings internally begin. So she and I will certainly do our best to make sure that the leadership transition does not interfere with the budget development process. Second, an important feature to consider as we begin work on 2017-18 is our health insurance program, and in two respects. As you know, the district shifted from a self-insurance arrangement to something called the Connecticut Partnership last year, and that has saved a lot of money in the current year, and it will continue to save money in future years. But that savings is now baked into our current budget, so it's not there to be had a second time. So that program continues to serve us well, but in terms of looking at percentage increase of budget, that opportunity has passed. Second, and also with regard to the health insurance program, you may know that due to reductions in the Board of Education's budget request from last year, the health insurance account was underfunded by about $740,000. Now, we had the good fortune of having a medical retention fund, which is there to facilitate the payout of claims under the old plan. And there is currently a surplus in that account, which has allowed us to cover the $740,000 underfunding of the health budget. That will not be available in 2017-18. This payout of insurance claims from last year will be completed over the course of this year, and that fund will be dissolved. So that means that from day one, we need to add about $740,000 to the health budget just to bring it up to even before we even start looking at rate increases or anything else. And I can see some puzzled expressions on a couple of faces, so Ms. Munsell, if you could be ready to help me out on this topic, but I'll just leave it for now to say, in order to make up for the current year's shortfall, we need to get next year's budget up by $740, and that obviously contributes to pressure on the budget. Third, there are salary costs related to collective bargaining agreements, either that are in place or currently being negotiated. And so taken together, the salary pressure and the health insurance adjustments that I just spoke of would probably account for almost a 3% increase before we have any discussion about new priorities, new staffing, new programs, things of that sort. That's just all under the heading of it's a difficult year. On top of that, from the town's perspective, as was mentioned earlier tonight, the town saw an almost $4 million reduction in state aid, including a significant reduction in the education cost-sharing grant this year. I've seen nothing on the state horizon that makes me feel like their financial situation is going to improve, and that therefore there will be no further reductions. And I didn't mean that to be funny, but I think it's true. So, tough year. Having said all of that, as always, our obligation is to develop budget proposals that respond to the needs of our students, including the implementation of action steps in your long-range district improvement plan. That doesn't change just because times are tough. What I did remind my colleagues of, and certainly remind myself of, is that we will need to identify potential savings to offset costs of new initiatives and positions. Simply put, if something new is a top priority, then by definition there's something else that's a lesser priority, and nobody likes to come to those meetings. We like to add things. But this year, for the reasons I've described, doing new things is going to require the discipline of looking more closely at old things. Finally, I just want to mention some important dates, and we'll get this out to you in writing shortly. The Board of Education will receive the budget at the January 10th, 2017 regular meeting. You will then discuss it at a special meeting on the 17th of January, and again on the 24th of January. And then at your regular meeting on January 26th, next year, you will take action presumably on the budget and meet the deadline for getting it over to the town hall, which is January 31st. And we'll get those dates out to you shortly so you have them for your calendar. Tonight, we just want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, things that my administrative colleagues and I can take back and be thinking about as we begin the early stages of this process.
So I'd encourage board members that this is not the meeting at which we delve into all of the math behind some of Dr. Tracy's comments, but more, this is the time for board members to say, if it's possible, could you get this in the budget? And so I would ask board members to focus on that side of it, because that's what the October meeting is intended to accomplish. Who wishes to go first? Mr. Calabrese.
All right, I'll be fairly brief, but there's a couple things I'd like to touch upon. First off, I would love to see us continue to implement the district improvement plan. Specifically, I really want to see the world language program rolled out K-2 like it is scheduled to. I think we should also continue to look to expand upon the utility cost savings by increasing any kind of energy savings, whether it's solar on all the new roofs that we've been doing. But I think there's still a lot of facility money that we can save there. And then one of the big things that I've stressed over the years, and again, I think it's the prime time to look at this, would be the potential of combining IT services with the town, seeing that the town still does not have an IT director in place. So to me, it seems like it's the opportune time to look at that. However, again, it needs to be priced out and all that. It might not be a saving. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other board members, Mr. Patton.
Okay, so related to my professional development comments before on the school calendar, so I would like to see if we could cost out, and I will attempt in the next couple of weeks to find some offsets for this if possible. I know it's getting tighter every year, to see what the cost would be for 2 extra professional development days in the summer before school starts, purely for enhancing or showcasing new teaching strategies to teachers. Whether it's teaching in the block strategies for different subjects, because foreign language teaching in the block is not the same as band teaching in the block, or, for that matter. And then, things like, I know in the district improvement plan there's already things in place, but this would kind of enhance that in terms of transitions from elementary to middle school and middle school to high school. I think, those are the reason why we don't do those things more is because, we can't shove any more professional development during the school year with half days off and whatnot, and then certainly it's costly to do it in the summer, as Mrs. Parsh said before. So maybe it's not for all 1,000+ teachers. Maybe there's a core of teachers that we could concentrate then, and teachers with whatever it is, less than 3 to 5 years experience in the district. So maybe we wouldn't have to do all 1,000, but I'd like to see the cost implications of that, of 2 days of that. And again, I will look for things that we can offset at least as much of that as possible.
Other comments from board members? Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
I'll reiterate Mr. Calabrese's point in terms of, I'm certainly a board member who is willing to go before the other town bodies and stand behind that rollout of the world language program. I don't want our commitment to that to waver, which additionally then I'm not losing sight of those social studies texts that we have not purchased yet either, and that I do think that's important that we get behind, because we did that deliberately out over 2 years. I believe it's the elementary school texts that still have to be purchased. I thought there might have been something at the high school as well, but that we do that because that's meant to support that new curriculum. We didn't want to overwhelm the elementary school teachers with both math and social studies, but I do think it's important we maintain our commitment to that. I just had a few other things looking through I also think it's very important that we stay focused on the district improvement plan, because finances are so tight. The entire rationale for anything we ask for should be in support of our own improvement, and that rationale would come from that district improvement plan. So I know I was 4 points that I looked at, and I don't know if they come with dollar amounts, but I was just interested in our sticking with was the year 2 of embedding the technology and the professional development that was going to support that. And
You happen to have the numbers that were
Yeah, that
associated?
one
That
I-
might make it easier for them to...
yeah, I wrote the numbers on the rest of them. I will look that up in a minute and get that back to you. The other one was page 28, 1-20, was the professional development by subject. And in the interest of full disclosure, I did make an amendment to add that one to the district improvement plan. So it is of a personal interest, but just that idea of subject area knowledge and having that as a specific focus of the professional development, I really do believe in it's invaluable. I'm actually going to skip one, just go to my last one, was on page 31, 4-17. I still wasn't, I don't recall now what was meant by those enrichment opportunities, both academic and non-academic for K through 8. So I'm interested in that idea. I support that idea. I don't think it would come with a huge budget number. Obviously, it would need to have a very good rationale to have that be something that is looked to for this coming year. But if there was something that the staff really stood behind, I would be interested in that. Thank you.
Other comments from board members? Other comments from board members relative to things they would hope the superintendent could squeeze into the budget? Mr. Llewellyn.
It's kind of a follow-up on our conversation earlier about the savings of consolidating the one classroom of Dwight pre-K into Burr. I think it would be less buses, less teachers. Even if you shift the teachers over to Burr, you're probably going to get economies of scale there. And following up on Mr. Calabrese's comment about the IT group, I'd also like to understand the potential of combining with the town or outsourcing, even say the HR capacity, but some of the IT, HR, and the like. Thank you.
Other comments from board members? Mrs. Maxon, is there anybody else that wishes to make a comment?
I'm just giving this is just the number.
Therefore, Mrs. Maxon Connolly.
And I'm not positive this comes with a dollar sign, but that mention of the tech embedding was 1-3.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members on budget ideas going forward? If none, then I'll say that I join with my colleagues, and I suspect that all 9 of us, whether stated or not, would like to see the World Language Program continue in terms of its implementation. I will say that consolidation of administrative functions is something that always deserves to be looked at. But we're talking about human beings here, staff that are either in the school district or on the town side. In debating a consolidation without having some discussion among the various department heads as to how that might work on a management perspective, and then be able to engage their specific staff in that conversation. If suddenly I'm sitting out there and I happen to be working in the IT department of the town, and a town body is talking about my job, that's not the best morale booster. So I agree that it is a subject that needs to be addressed, but I'm not sure that its first discussion can take place in an open board meeting. But the idea is worth considering on a variety of administrative departments. So I'd only make those 2 comments. Any other comments from board members? In the meantime, don't wait till December 31st, but if you have an idea that suddenly comes to you, feel free to get those directly to Dr. Tracy.
Excuse me, can I get one clarification from Dr.
Yeah, please.
Tracy? You did say there's an additional 740 of expenses related to the self-insurance and the runoff of the tails and the claims. And you said you had some puzzled faces and you could address it. That one I'd kind of like to understand now. My understanding is we've gone from a self-insured to a premium-based. So
I'll remind you of the budget discussion that took place last year.
Actually, do you mind if Dr. Tracy?
Through the chair to Dr. Tracy. Dr.
Thank you.
Tracy was not at the budget meeting, so I might be in a better position to answer the question. In looking at the projections that Aon gave us as to what the IBNR might be in order to pay off all claims that might be provided by June 30th, there was about $800,000 more in the medical retention fund than needed to cover those claims. At the time, a member of the Board of Selectmen looked at that and felt that, well, that means that we're over budgeting, and why should we budget at that extra $800,000? We can use the balance sheet $800,000 to pay current year's expenses. And so therefore they reduced the 16-17 year health insurance budget by $800,000, assuming we'll take it out of that excess in the balance sheet, which automatically creates a hole because you can only use that balance sheet account one time.
So you're saying that $800,000 was in reserve, $800,000 worth of claims didn't come through to consume that reserve.
740,000, right.
Used 800, sorry. And that 740,000 was excess liquidity after all claims and was applied against premiums under the new program.
Correct.
So it reduced 16, 17 premiums by $740,000.
Not the premiums, but the budget to pay them. So therefore, in order to pay those premiums, some of the money came out of our current year budget and some came out of the balance sheet,
Correct. You
$740,000.
used it to reduce the expenses
Yeah.
because it was actual cash. Was it actual cash?
Yeah, actual cash.
So you used it to reduce the expenses.
Not to reduce the expenses. The bills were still the bills. The insurance bills still existed.
Correct.
Just the source of revenue to pay those bills, part of it, most of it was coming out of our 16-17 budget, but 740,000 of it.
You used balance sheet funds to pay the invoice. The expense didn't change, just the money allocated to pay the expense.
Based on the decision of the Board of
Fine.
Selectmen,
Just
Board of
clarifying.
Finance,
Thank you.
and...
Okay, no, that makes
and
sense. Thank you.
RTM, correct. And you might remember that when the budget left our hands, we had budgeted to not have that happen and to allow the balance sheet account to give us some cushion going forward over a couple of years. The board of those who made the decision and final decisions had a different philosophy than we did when it left our hands. No other questions or comments? We'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of October 4th, 2016. Mrs. Gerber moves. Ms. Pitko seconds. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand for the special meeting. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Llewellyn. All opposed? Abstain?
I was abstaining. I wasn't
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't there, so.
Okay, so these are 1, 2, 3, 3 abstentions, being Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, and Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. The rest of the board voted in affirmative. So that's 6-3. 603, yes, correct. The next set of minutes is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of October 4th, 2016. Mrs. Gerber moves. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly seconds. Any comments on those set of minutes? Mr. Llewellyn.
Page 3, please. Under the comments, under my comments halfway down that say reference page 13, number 3, the first sentence says, what is the sample size for free and reduced? Should we be concerned about this decline? Ms. Parks said that the sample size is significantly smaller than all student categories. I'd like to amend it to strike the remainder of that sentence, please, and insert 21 students in 2013/14 and 14 students in 2014/15, which were the numbers that Mrs. Parks provided. And I'll let you choose the punctuation between students category and the numbers.
you have that as, do you have the wording where he wanted it? Okay, I'll ask first, you'd like to change it. What you're really doing is you'd like to offer a motion to amend the minutes. So I'll ask the secretary to read what it is that she's captured, and then you confirm that that's a correct statement.
Mrs. Park said that the sample size is significantly smaller than the all-student category. 21 students in 2013-14, 14 students in 2014-15. And that's the end of the sentence.
Perfect, thank you.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
You wish to make that as a motion?
I do.
Who wishes to second it? Mrs. Lou McCormick. Do you have any comment that you want to make in support of the motion that you just made?
I think that it helps quantify the situation. Significantly smaller, agreed, but it helps frame it because it's actually important as we look at the numbers. It helps quantify why the variation from year to year is so small. It's actually important that the sample size is so small so we can understand the variation. Otherwise, there could be reason for grave concern.
Any other comments that people wish to make? I'll only say that the only reason I will oppose this is because we make clear efforts to ask people in advance if there are any changes they wish to make to the minutes, so that research can be done to look at the tape and the audio and whatnot to say, are these the words that you're putting in here based on what was actually said, or your memory of the conversation? So not having that work done, I prefer to adopt the minutes as they are.
Yep, not having gotten until Thursday night and not having a chance till this morning to look at it, my apologies.
Yep. Any other comments that board members wish to make? If I would ask the secretary to read the amendment, please.
So the motion is to amend the second sentence to read, Mrs. Park said the sample size is significantly smaller than the all-student category. 21 students in 2013-14, 14 students in 2014-15, and to delete the remainder of the sentence.
Okay. That is so that the board can have clarity. Is there any question on what's being voted on? Okay. All in favor of the amendment offered by Mr. Llewellyn, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Patton, Mr. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed. Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko. Were you here for the conversation, or are you not acting on these minutes? Were you here for the amendment being offered? Then you were not here, so we'll record you as an abstention. So the motion passes
531.
531. Thank you very much. So the main motion is to approve the minutes, of the regular meeting of October 4th, 2016 as amended. Is the board clear on the motion that's in front of you as the main motion as amended? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0. Thank you very much. And superintendent report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Three items, if I might. The State Department of Education just recently released the school and district profiles for 2014-15. They're late. It came with an apology, but here they are. And we'll be putting them up on the website so that folks can take a look. It's a very useful document because there's one for every school district in the state. They are displayed in a kind of a comparable format, and you'll see things like student performance indicators, enrollment, demographic makeup, attendance, graduation rates, expenditures, staffing levels, a lot of the things that people like to know. How does one district compare to another? And so we will have that up shortly for your information and that of the public. Second, I received a letter from the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education indicating that 3 publications by this school district had been designated as honorable mention as a part of CABE's Excellence in Education Communications program, specifically the district budget, the budget presentation, and the social studies curriculum presentation, all being recognized by your state association. And finally, I had the pleasure yesterday morning, on a very nice morning in Fairfield, to join the first selectman and about 40 other individuals to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Mill River Wetland Committee, which has been an advocate for the stewardship of our rivers and estuaries since 1966. The committee, as you may know, also sponsors the River Lab experiential education program, and they demonstrated some of the water and the rocks and all the stuff that you learn down there, and that has literally benefited thousands of Fairfield students who have gone through the program in that beautiful setting. So a very nice way to start my day yesterday. That's it for me, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions of the superintendent on the items mentioned? Ms.
I just
Cornell?
missed something. Somebody sent us a document with a letter of apology that it was late. Who was that
No,
from?
it was a phone call.
Okay.
The
But
person
from
over the
whom?
phone said, because I called and I said, well, where's the one for 15-16? And he said, we're working on that. We just got 14-15 out. It was late. The other one will be coming soon.
Was this from the state?
Less than 12 months from now.
So can't we tell the state and write them an apology letter back?
I didn't plan to do that. I accepted his apology over the phone, and we moved on.
Any other questions for our superintendent? Any questions for our superintendent? Hearing none. Committee and liaison reports. Do we have any committee or liaison reports from people? From any of the committees that they are associated with? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Just very briefly, PTA Council had its first meeting, and less so for the board and more so for the public. Just a reiteration to all the PTAs that PTA Council does have a tremendous number of funds in various categories, whether it's for initiatives coming from staff, initiatives coming from the PTAs. They are looking to fund these proposals, and there's a lot out there for the PTAs to take advantage of, and oftentimes the money is not fully spent. So just a reminder to PTAs, it's at least worth having your PTA Council rep bring that to the PTA Council's attention for possible funding.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Can I ask a question to Ms. Kennelly?
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly,
Is
sure.
the PTA Council creating videos of, I'd heard?
Yes.
Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, it's a new direction that they're looking to take, is to take greater advantage of Fair TV and to get more, whether it's arts events at different schools, certain athletic events, and really so that when people wonder what's your money being spent on, et cetera, that this is something that would be an outreach for the community to see what's going on at these schools. And that is something, it's still in the idea phase, but it's moving ahead at a good clip. So hopefully I'll know more by next. Thank you for the question. To know more exactly how is it getting rolled out, what are some of the first schools that will appear, and I'll certainly mention that next month.
Okay, thank you.
Any other committee or liaison reports? Mr. Patton.
For the first time in a while, a Board of Health meeting has actually coincided with our Board of Ed meetings, so I'll just touch on things that I guess relate to the school system here. As one of our student representatives mentioned, there was it wasn't an outbreak, but there were some cases of MRSA infections at Ludlow, and it was only a few kids. They were all related. Ludlow High School, sorry. It was all contained, and Board of Health sent letters and had discussions with the headmaster about how to take care of it, what to look for. So it wasn't any kind of epidemic like may have been attempted to be reported on social media. So the Board of Health was on top of it, and there was a lot of worried parents, and they did their job and made sure that the headmaster communicated that to the parents and the students. There's Millie Sachs, who's a Fairfield nurse at Ward. She's been in the system, I think, for 20 years, and she's going to retire, I believe, in the next month. So that's kind of a monumental thing. And doesn't usually happen on the Board of Health side, but I guess one of the secretaries in every EpiPens that are needed around the schools expire at whatever points. And so we go to the companies, and if you all know about the situations with everything getting reported by the EpiPen companies, trying to jack up the prices and all that stuff. Well, so we needed For example, last month, 24 new EpiPens, and because of various issues, one of the secretaries in the Board of Health office basically negotiated with the company and kind of applied for this kind of free program grant that we had no intention of getting. Instead of paying the couple $100 an EpiPen, and they saved us about $1,200 off the Board of Ed budget, because the Board of Ed budget pays for the EpiPens. So we just saved $1,200. We can use that towards professional development on my pay for like 20 minutes. So that's not something that's going to happen every month, but I think those companies are kind of realizing that they're getting needled to death. And then we approved the new vaccination policy for all the children in the district, which is the only major policy that we approved. That's about it.
Anybody else? Seeing nobody, on to open board comment. Any comments from board members? Any comments from board members? Any comments from board members? Ms. Carnell.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I guess, to the whole board that, we're all here to do our job for the town and the district and most of all the students. And we sit here with, different views and thoughts, but I really think at the table there should be respect to any board member always when we interact with each other.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, let me make Ms. Pitko.
You just reminded us that the Mill River Wetland Committee is having a trivia night tomorrow night at the Bear and Grill on Black Rock Turnpike at 7:30. It's kind of a fundraiser, so.
This is a school district. We're not going to advertise activities that happen at a bar. Okay, a couple of comments. I have a list of board members who are able to attend the CABE conference. I only have 2 that are not able to do it and 2 that we've not heard yet. So if the 2 that we have not heard from can get to Meg Brown so that we can confirm what we are doing there, that would be helpful to her. We've put the date on Dr. Jones's schedule, but it depends on whether she can get time away from whether that'll be the week in November and she wants to use that time for going to a CABE conference. So that will be her decision. That one was mentioned. The RIASAP survey results will be on our December 13th agenda. Normally it might come a month earlier, but RIASAP was somewhat concerned, as was the school leadership, staff leadership, and a couple of the PTA leaders, that the results of this survey they use in planning the school year activities for their students. And if we wait till December before we get it and they can't get it till January, it is less helpful to them. So I'm just alerting the board to know that it will be on the December agenda, but the information will be shared with some leaders so that they can do adequate planning for their 2 high school populations. So look forward to that at the December meeting. And I'd remind the board and the public that we have scheduled a town hall style meeting for the Board of Education at 7:30 on October 24th, because the RTM canceled their meeting. Then we're able to hold it here in this room, which I presume will mean that we're able to get Fair TV coverage, only that decision is Fair TV's decision. With no other comments, we're at the point of adjournment, that this regular meeting of the Board of Education adjourned. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Carnell, all in favor, raise your hand. And it is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Okay. Perfect. This is not good at 10:30 at night. No, I'm sleeping. You didn't bring your tuna. No. Oh, okay. All right, I gotta go.